Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Just to cover the routine of following emergency evacuation details first. There are no emergency drills planned for today, but in the event of a fire or emergency, vacate the building in an orderly manner to the nearest available exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. Recording of this meeting, can I ask that the live stream is started and verbal confirmation provided when we are broadcasting?
I confirm, Chairman, that we are live streaming.
Well, that's good. Thank you very much. So welcome to this meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and also making a recording. The recording will be available via the Council website shortly after the meeting has concluded. Other attendees are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meeting, provided that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If you do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please identify yourself so anyone who intends to record the meeting can be made aware. Does anyone wish to indicate? One person, thank you.
Me too, please.
Sorry, somebody else? Oh yes, thank you very much. Member of the public. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, could members speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum and ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. I think we have some people joining us remotely today. Councillor Graham Andrews, can you hear me, Councillor Andrews?
Yes, I can, Chair. Thank you.
I can't see you, but is that deliberate?
Hang on. There you go. I am here.
See and hear you. Thank you. I think that's any member that's of the committee that's available online. Everybody else, I believe, is here in person. So we've got other members who are joining us remotely. The head of law and legal business partner, can you hear us and see us okay?
I can see and hear you, Chairman.
Super, thank you very much. Other people online, I can see that we've got our clerk who's also here in person. Nobody else online that I've missed, I don't think. That I need to ask. Anybody online I've not asked? Okay. Thank you. Present in the room today, we have members of the committee, myself as chair, Councillor Hewitt as vice chair, Councillor Andrews, as we've just seen, is remote, but we have Councillor Anson, Councillor Fagan, Councillor Jones. We also have our co-opting members, Victor Down of the Diocese of Cardiff, Andy James, Parent Governor representative for the special school sector, Sam Prattley and Fiona Reid. Cabinet members in the room, we have Councillor Harvey and Councillor Toynbee. Thank you both for joining us. We have Paul Walker, the Chief Executive, welcome Paul. Darryl Freeman, Corporate Director, Children and Young People, welcome Darryl. Paul Billingham, who is Service Director, Safeguarding, QA and Improvement. Thank you for joining us. Grant Popelier, Project Lead. Not here. Okay. We have Michael Carr, Statutory Scrutiny Officer. Steve Tucker, already mentioned, as our clerk. Oh, and we've got Alfie, who's our technical support, and that's you presume. Yeah, that was the name I saw on the screen. Thank you. Anyone whose name I haven't included?
Yeah, Joni Hughes.
Oh, Joni, yes, of course, thank you. And part of the executive team, is that correct? Yes, thank you very much. Just pointed out about apologies. Next item of apologies, the Vice Chair's prompting me, but we have apologies from Councillor Stone, who is a member of the committee, and also from the leader of the council, Councillor David Hitchener. Are there any other apologies? Okay, thank you. There are no named substitutes, so we don't have to name those. It is statutory request declarations of interest from council members. Are there any members who wish to declare any Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 areas of interest in any of today's agenda items? There are none. Thank you. Item 4, minutes of the last meeting. To approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of April 2022. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Can we have a proposer and second that we accept those minutes, please? Councillor Jones, proposed, seconded. Councillor Fagan, all those in favour? Anyone against? Anyone abstaining? So I take that as unanimous. Okay, thank you. Questions from members of the public? We have 4 questions. Question 1 has been answered, and I'm just asking, are there any supplementary questions to question 1?
No, Chair.
No, Chair, thank you. Question 2 has also been answered. I think there is a supplementary question to this one. Would you like to read it to us, please? See.
Yeah. I'll just pop it on the screen. Is the question I'd like to read it, or?
Yes, please. I think it makes sense. Oh, well, I think you'd like to read it on your behalf, wouldn't you? You've got it on screen. You'd like to read it, Steve?
Yes, please. Okay. So, supplementary question: were 43 babies taken into care during 2021-22, i.e. 19 plus 24? Please insert data for Herefordshire in the table about POs and babies taken into care. I'm interested in the rates of babies taken into care within weeks of birth and or mothers leaving hospital without their newborns. Provide for 2020-21. Numbers and rates for Herefordshire. Any metrics that compare Herefordshire with the other areas in the table with sources. In view of the comparatively high PO rate and for children in care and care proceedings in Herefordshire, how and by when will support and reunification be improved to reduce care proceedings, babies and children in care and placement orders? And how much did Herefordshire Council receive in 2020-21, 2021-22 for children who were adopted subsequent to the council obtaining a PO?
Thank you. There's obviously a lot of detail in that question. I don't know whether officers feel they can give some feedback now, or how you.
I think given the level of detail and the fact that I'm only seeing it, it will need to be a written response, Chair. I will respond. I think when you look at the rates against all those local authorities, ours isn't a comparatively high placement order rate compared to some of those. We're kind of median, but that's by the by in the sense. I would provide a full response to the questions there, because there's a lot of data and additional stuff that I just don't have to hand in terms of the amounts the council will receive during those time periods.
Okay, thank you.
I'm very happy to provide a full response.
Thank you. The person answering supplementary question wanted to.
I think you said that Herefordshire hasn't got a particularly high rate.
I can't hear you very well. Can you get near the
Yeah,
microphone, please? Thank you. No, your microphone was on, but
It's just not
it's a bit nearer to you.
Could you just repeat what you said about
Just a second.
Herefordshire?
Just a second, please.
Sorry, yeah, constitutionally, Chair, but public questions are not for debate.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
But if it was a supplementary question, that could be asked. It's not for debate. Okay.
Excuse me, I'm not actually debating. What I'm doing is, I think there was incorrect information was given, so I would like to to correct what I think is incorrect information.
Well, I think what we need to do is the revised constitution from the clerk is wait till you get your answer back, a written answer, and then raise any points that are not appropriate or you don't think are correct in that.
Yes.
Would you agree that's constitutional? I'd like to go about it. If you accept that as being constitutionally the way we have to manage these things.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Question 3 has been provided a response. Are there any supplementaries to question 3? Thank you. Question 4 was a question which I should answer as the chair, but the answer to the question that we knew about the information was right.
Sorry, Chair, I think I've muddled up the order, so there was a supplementary, I
Oh,
should
was
say
it?
question 3.
Okay, right.
My apologies. So I'll read out.
Would you please? Yes,
I'll
thank
read
you.
out.
Thank you.
No one is disputing that state schools need to take account of Article 3, 8 and 14 of the Human Rights Act when dealing with credible allegations of child-on-child sexual violence. The list of articles quoted in the written answer have clearly been stated in Department of Education guidance since 1st of September 2018. My question didn't ask for a list of articles, it asked explicitly for officers to explain how Article 3 and 8 of the Human Rights Act apply. My question asked what, in practice, it means to comply with Article 3 and 8. Once again, officers have failed to answer the question or offer even one sentence of interpretation of the relevant law. I'm left wondering why officers from Children's Services so persistently refuse to provide this committee and the public with proper answers to the question as to how, in practice, Article 3 and 8 of the Human Rights Act should apply. Officers in Children's Services have also persistently refused to meet with the public who are raising the alarm about human rights abuses. Ofsted stated clearly that in this county, children are not protected from harm. Public campaigning on this issue have been saying the same thing for years. We now know that this council has paid a staggering £290,000 in human rights damages in the last 5 years. Perhaps this is the time for a little humility about the council's human rights record and some intellectual curiosity about what the public and the KC advising them are saying. Will the Director of Children's Services commit to meeting with the members of the public who have repeatedly said that children are at risk of harm from ongoing breaches of the Human Rights Act, because the advice council officers are giving to schools does not take into account the procedural obligations imposed on schools under Article 3.
Thank you. I don't know whether, as the Director, you wish to make a response now or put a response in.
So I can certainly say at this point, there are no plans for me to meet with individual families, but I'm happy to review that and think about that with the Chair and Vice Chair, and in line with our plans to set up a Listening to Families forum. So I'm happy to discuss with the Cabinet member how we progress that. Schools are obliged to apply the Human Rights Act in accordance with individual and unique circumstances. So I'm sorry that the question doesn't feel we answered the question. I'll need to consider how we do that better.
Okay, thank you. And I know on behalf of myself and Vice Chair, we would really welcome having that discussion with you to see if we can make sure we can eventually answer this question successfully. That's great. We'll get together and do that. Thank you. All supplementaries now, have we correctly? Okay, question 4 is the question, did we know about the sums of money that have been spent? And the answer to that is no, we didn't know. That covers all the questions. Thank you. I move on to the main focus of the agenda, which is item 7.
Excuse me, am I entitled to a supplementary question?
Supplementary, another supplementary. To that question?
Sorry, I wasn't aware that the question 4 was in the room.
Ah, okay, right. So you would like to ask a supplementary question?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, please do.
Before I ask my supplementary, I'd like to ask.
Sorry, the microphone still isn't on, sorry. Better, thank you.
Before I ask my supplementary question, I'd like to ask why I wasn't allowed to have a written answer.
I can't hear you. I don't know whether anybody else can.
I'm sorry, I can't either.
Can you hear me now?
Keep going, we'll pick it up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Before I ask the supplementary question, can I just ask why I was not given a written answer? There's a simple answer to the question, which was no, the committee did not know about the human rights payouts. Could you just clarify why that could not have been put in writing? Because it puts me in a difficult position in terms of formulating a supplementary question.
I think the question has been given about the training and people being aware of human rights has been answered. Clearly not to your satisfaction, but
No, my question is about whether or not the committee were aware of the payout.
sorry, I can't hear you.
The question was about whether the committee were made aware of the vast sums of money being paid out on human rights breaches. And you've now said, no, the committee were not aware.
Yes, I have said that, yes.
Okay. So I'm just wondering why that could not have been published as normal as a written answer. But I'm going to ask my supplementary question, which is that it appears that once again, significant safeguarding failures have not been brought to the attention of this committee. If you weren't aware of these cases, then you weren't aware of the underlying safeguarding failures operating.
No, we weren't aware, but I can tell you that in the questioning, we will be asking some questions about that subject.
But my point is, I'd like to make a link to what happens when, through public activity or journalist activity, the committee becomes aware of a failure. I'll give you an example. The safeguarding failure in connection with peer-on-peer abuse, which led to an external investigation report in 2017. That 2017 report was kept from the committee until a public question in 2020. That public question said, why was that report kept from the committee and why was safeguarding failures allowed to continue? So what happens then? The council then commissioned a report, another external investigation report in November 2020. That report has not published an answer. We still do not have an answer to the question asked in June 2020, why was that safeguarding failure hidden from the committee and then allowed to be repeated? So the point is, there is a culture here of cover up, and then when you found out, cover up again by delaying and delaying and delaying. I'm a key witness in that investigation and I haven't yet had a formal interview. It's been fraught with difficulty, terms of reference written by one of the departments under scrutiny. I've been asked to participate in an investigation and yet I'm not going to be allowed to see the evidence, the interpretation of my evidence. It's completely unreasonable. I cannot participate in that. So the point is, even when the scrutiny committee asks really good questions, like why was it kept from scrutiny? You're not getting answers in a timely fashion. The culture is cover up, when you get found out, cover up again. That's the problem here.
Thank you for the points of question. Just a second, I'm going to pick that up. As I said, we are going to pick up those points in our question and answering on the Ofsted report, which hopefully will cover the point you're making. But if not, then you'll come back and ask again. But we are aware of all that, and we have actually listed some questions we intend to ask on that subject.
And will you follow up on the failure to answer that question in June 2020?
We will follow up on that.
Why was the report hidden and for so long?
Yes,
Why was safeguarding failure allowed to continue for so long?
we will follow up on that. Thank you. Did any officer want to make any comment any further on that at this stage? The report, the investigation report hasn't yet been published, has it?
I was going to simply comment on the fact you've already indicated you're going to ask some questions on the 290,000 Human Rights Act breaches in the course of the meeting.
Yes, exactly. So hopefully we'll cover some of those points, but we will also follow up on them. You want to make a comment? Okay, so thank you for the supplementary question. Obviously noted, covered.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to the external report which is being put together, which has been referred to, that's not yet complete. There's some quite distinct terms of reference we've set out how that will be reported once it's concluded. And those were agreed back in the time when that report was commissioned. As part of receiving that report, we will need to revisit where that's presented to and how that's then shared on with scrutiny. I think that's an important part of this, how that's then shared on with scrutiny after so much time has gone, and the investment by a number of people, both within the council and outside of the council, and how we maximise the learning that comes from that report and share that with scrutiny as part of it. That's the bit we've got to
28 months late.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you. That confirms what I said. The report hasn't yet been published into the investigation, and hopefully that will answer all the questions that are being asked. We'll wait for publication, which is due, I think, sometime later this year. Chief Executive, is that correct? It's due. Thank you. I think I've already answered question 4 that we didn't know. Right, moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 7, which is obviously the key purpose of the meeting, inspection of Herefordshire Children's Services Ofsted report. I'd like to ask the ECS to introduce us to the item, please? I think most of us already know it, but a brief introduction to the report, some of the people would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So Ofsted inspected our children's services in July this year and published their report on 21st September. Their judgment was that the service is inadequate in each domain of the inspection framework, and we fully accept their findings. For myself as the Director of Children's Services and on behalf of my colleagues across the service, I want to say again that I am sorry that some children, young people and families are clearly not receiving the right help at the right time. We are working hard to make improvements. Despite some small recognition of recent improvements, we know that we have a lot more to do and must deliver improvement faster than we've so far managed to do. Inspectors concluded that children are not protected from harm, but their opening sentence to the report and portrayed in stark and detailed terms the impact on children and young people of years of decline of the service. Recognising that you will have read the inspection report and my report to Council in detail, I will not go through either in great detail, allowing us as much time as possible to discuss and debate the issues raised. In summary, though, the report is critical of the quality and impact of social work practice, a historical lack of capable and stable leadership, the lack of meaningful engagement with children and families, an underdeveloped and ineffective partnership, and a poor corporate response to the previous inspection report and subsequent focus visit reports. Many of the issues and challenges faced by the service are long-standing and deep-rooted and have come about over a number of years. This hasn't come about since the High Court judgment last year, and the decline in services is clearly indicated as having been over the past 4 years, which is the inspection framework, not in the last few months, where some improvements and progress is recognised in the report. During the inspection and in the immediate aftermath, we did the following. We met with senior leaders of some of our partner agencies to ensure an immediate partnership response. We increased capacity and resources in the MASH and took steps to ensure improved timeliness of strategy meetings. We responded in each case to any cases that were raised with us by inspectors, and we have since further reviewed each of these cases. We have reviewed all of the cases in the pre-proceeding stage of the public law outline. We've reviewed step downs from child protection plans, and we've been very clear with our partners about expectations for the timeliness of strategy meetings going forward. Currently, we are focused on practice improvement and on the quality of practice, and on developing our Ofsted Improvement Action Plan through a range of engagement activities which are about to commence. We are working with and supporting the work of the Commissioner for Children's Services, Eleanor Brazil. We're further developing our performance and management information systems. Much of this work had started before the inspection, but certainly has progressed, and there's been no pause during the summer. We're preparing to undertake a self-evaluation of our practice, which we intend to be concluded by the end of January 2023. And that informs part of our annual engagement activity with Ofsted. And I've previously gone on record and said that I would like to bring that self-evaluation to a future Children's Scrutiny Committee meeting, so that it's in the public domain. We are continuing to review and improve our services for children and young people with special educational needs and or a disability. Recently concluded a peer review, and we've committed to bringing that to a future Scrutiny Committee meeting. We're working with our partners to ensure that the response to Ofsted and the improvement plan are a multi-agency response and plan. And the Chief Executive and myself are bringing partners together in a summit in the next few weeks to start that activity. That's just a brief summary of what is a great deal more activity, but I'll happily answer questions as we go through the chat.
Thank you for that. Before we move on to the questioning, would the Cabinet Member responsible for Children's Services like to make any additional comments at this stage?
No, I echo a lot of what's already been said, and I presented it to Cabinet and full Council. I look forward to what committee members have to say. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's just worth reiterating briefly where we are and how we came to this. So just to remind not only members here, but all the public who were listening, there was an inspection of Herefordshire Local Authority Children's Services from the 18th to 29th of July by Lisa Summers, a Magistrates Inspector. There are 4 areas of investigation, and they are the impact of leaders and social work practice with children and families, graded inadequate, the experiences and progress of children in health and protection, graded inadequate, the experiences and progress of children in care and care leaders was graded inadequate, the overall effectiveness is inadequate. We were obviously devastated by that, but more particularly that it showed that we hadn't delivered the level of care and protection and safeguarding for our children as we should be. We're all acutely conscious of that. But as a result of that very appalling inspection result, there was a strategy direction issued to Herefordshire Council in relation to children's services under section 497A4B of the Education Act, in which basically a commissioner was appointed to look into how we are proceeding with delivery of our services with a time period of 12 weeks to decide whether we were able to continue with looking at those services and providing them ourselves, whether some other means of delivering them should be recommended by the Commissioner. The report's been presented to all members of the Council. It's been to Cabinet, it's been to the full Council meeting, and is now presented to us as scrutiny to scrutinise the elements of the report, and the purpose of which obviously to add value, how scrutiny can help in making sure that we address all the failings that have been identified in a constructive and positive way to make sure we do actually, as quickly as possible, deliver the quality of services our children and young people can expect. It's quite a complex report, obviously, with a lot of detail in it. So the officers and Deputy Chair and myself have been looking at how we can scrutinise this in a way that makes it clear what areas we're looking at, what our finding conclusions are, and how we present them. So we've identified 12 key areas of questions for information for not only members of the committee, but also the public and those officers and members who are here to answer questions. And we'll go through each of those in turn. And the 12 areas which we're going to ask questions are leadership, corporate responsibility, MASH, multi-agency response, and other statutory organisations such as the Safeguarding Board, support services, performance and quality assurance, monitoring and tracking, voice of the children and families, including participation strategy and family involvement, quality of practice, management, workforce, Human Rights Act, and scrutiny. So we've put together questions under each of those areas to hopefully provide a structured way of providing our key conclusions. I would expect to come out of it some conclusions. There may be some information requests that the committee may have, and there may be some recommendations in addition to the ones that have come from Ofsted that we may want to add to help the officers and the executive in improving our service delivery. Any questions on any of that? Are people clear of the process we're going to follow? Okay, thank you. So first of all, we've got some questions on leadership. I think Councillor Andrews, one of your questions was on that. Can I ask you to perhaps open that questioning for us? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, can you hear me now, please, Chair? It's okay.
Can hear you loud and clear.
Brilliant. So I'm sure you'll be glad to know I wrote quite a few questions of this. So I'll start you off. What I'd like to know is how are things going to be different from its actions? How are you going to be measuring the success and failure of what it does? And will you have a HR support in the way of leadership and conduct to address that these are swift and correct? So what we understand from previously that we fell behind on some HR issues or addressing things quickly enough amongst the staff. So within the structure of what you're currently putting together as a council leadership team, what is going to be the support you'll have for the HR things that are likely to arrive in your work plan?
Thank you.
So thank you for the question. Certainly this started before the Ofsted inspection, but we have dedicated senior HR support and additional posts that's been allocated to children's services that liaises with me and my directorate leadership team. looking at issues of kind of contractual issues, performance, recruitment and retention, and there's a kind of a weekly meeting that goes on with that. And we've reviewed all job descriptions, for example, over the last few months, so that we're up to date with there. We'll have a microsite go live in the next few weeks in terms of ramping up our recruitment and retention activity. So we've got much more and dedicated HR support than we had, for example, 9 months ago. And I think that's already starting to pay dividends for us in terms of named contacts and named accountabilities across the service. Obviously, you're quite right that this report and the challenges of improvement don't make recruitment any easier, certainly in this process. So we're working very hard at the minute on our recruitment offer and our retention offer. Was there anything more specific in the question that you're asking? I think it's more general about the support as I heard it.
So you're muted still, Trans Andrews.
There you go. Yeah, I think you've answered it very well. What I'm hoping to hear is that you're going to have that dedicated support for the new people you're going to bring in, and the legacy items that you're going to also arrive to, where you'll discover them transitioning from the existing position they're in into your new ways of working, and making sure that we are not caught by anything that comes up as litigation or any sort of ways of working or corporate ways of working within the teams, which then conflict the success of what you want to do with this plan. So that I'm aware that the work that you're given through the report is a lot of work and very dedicated, focused, but also within the operational work of how you manage your team to do this work is also an immense project. And maybe it's going to be completely different to how the department and director has run before. So I'm hoping to see that it is dedicated. If you have dedicated HR just for this one director to do it, then I think that would be a good step. And I'd be really interested to see how that structure is going to be supportive for you to make sure that you're successful in this report and ongoing as the directorate forms its new image and its new way of working.
Thank you. And then just to add then, certainly as well as the additional HR and organisational development support, we've also got dedicated project management support, because you're right, this is a huge project in terms of what was originally the 3-year transformation plan and now will be the offset improvement action plan. And there's a separate work stream looking just at recruitment and retention, which includes how we manage our workforce and how we also provide really good learning and development opportunities. So we're growing our workforce for the future as well as addressing the current needs now.
Thank you. Leadership is obviously in 2 categories, both by members and by officers. I see we have the current member for Children's Services and also Councillor Harvey, presumably you're standing in for the leader. Any points either you'd like to make in relationship to the question on leadership from Councillor Andrews?
Yes, thank you. And I'd just like to follow up on what's just been said as well. I'm really, really pleased that there's more HR support in the directorate now, because it was well overdue. And I'm also really pleased that we're investing in CPD. I'm sure that'll make a difference. And thank you, Chair, for what you said earlier about scrutiny contributing to improvement in a constructive way, because we're all here, we all want the same thing. We're all here for the same purpose. And my question is always, how does everything we do, including this afternoon, help and support families and children in Herefordshire? So as far as leadership is concerned, I've got a very strong mandate from my cabinet colleagues. I'm working with all of them to make sure that it's concrete and practical when we say that children and families are at the centre of everything we do. I'm working closely with staff. It's really important that all the members of our workforce feel that they can speak out openly. That's very important. And I think we've really made progress on that already in terms of culture. I'm making the best use of external help. I welcome the appointment of Eleanor Brazil. I think it's going to be helpful. I think it's what we need. It's going to be constructive, and I think it marks a turning point. I also make the best use of external help from the DFE, from Ofsted, from the LGA. There's a lot of help out there. And we as a cabinet are very proactive about seeking it so that we can be the best that we can be. Obviously, I meet with our director every week. We look at performance, we look at data. We're reviewing our key partnerships because, as you know, as you can see from the Ofsted report, 3 of the key areas for improvement are about partnerships. So, you know, this is about the whole of Herefordshire. Everybody who works with children and families, not just us. So something that we are, as a council, taking a lead on is reviving the key partnerships. It's really important, and, you know, whether it's dentistry or EHCPs, whatever, it's not just us. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot of overdue work there as well. But for example, we're reviving the Children and Young People's Partnership, which will be focused on that early help, you know, making sure that children and families get the help that they need as soon as they need it. And I think there's potential there for working with Talk Community to get services out to people in the community. As far as leadership is concerned, I continue to have conversations with counterparts around the county. It's very useful, as you all know, to talk with people who've been on similar journeys, especially people who've got to Ofsted good, which is what we're ambitious to do as a cabinet, and as all of us, I'm sure. I'm very keen on strengthening our relationships with schools because they're communities that see nearly all our children very, very frequently. So that's another of my priorities. At political level, I'm always fighting for better resources for public services. I'm lobbying government to invest in social work, to, you know, support people who want to train as social workers, etc. It's really important that we all have a sense of ownership for this. You know, leadership is more than about just sort of asking the right questions. And I see a key part of my leadership as being about bringing people together, as us as members, as staff, and as local families and children, and as partners. So I think that coming together is possibly the most important part of my leadership to me. Thanks.
Thank you for some answers, a lot of reassurances, thank you. And we'll be scrutinising those, of course, but very reassuring that all those steps have been taken. Did you want to add anything, Councillor Harvey, to any of that?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to reiterate Councillor Toynbee's point about the whole cabinet being both behind her and also actively engaged in all aspects of us as a council addressing the issues highlighted in the Ofsted report and in the improvement plan, which was brought to us earlier this year in March. In terms of leadership and support, we're providing both the funding and the resources beyond funding that the leadership team is seeking in order to be able to address the challenges that the service area presents. The 3-year improvement plan required us to be committing just in this financial year an additional £11.4 million in order to get the resources in place to begin delivering on that plan. And you've already heard that there is strong project management, both in terms of how that improvement plan and the work that's going on with DFE, Ofsted and partners in responding to the Ofsted plan, to the Ofsted issues now. Project management is a big part of that, and I am, you know, strongly in favour of that continuing to be there. Making sure that you know, we're working to time and to cost on all of this, but also that we are understanding, and I hope Councillor Andrews is pleased to hear this, that we're understanding what the early performance indicators are, that we are seeing improvements. We all want to see improvements in the experience and the lives of children. But sometimes those that takes a while in order to be able to be evidenced at the child, and therefore we are wanting to make sure that we are identifying earlier the kind of things that we should be tracking to make sure that improvements are being achieved in how we're delivering this plan, and our performance improvement director is working very closely with the directorate at the moment in helping to formulate those performance indicator and improvement plans. So we, as a whole cabinet, recognise that this is not simply a responsibility for Councillor Toynbee as cabinet member for children and young people, that all of our directorates are involved with and touch children's lives in different ways and their families' lives. And so we're taking a whole cabinet approach in the same way that Paul, as our chief executive, is taking a whole council approach with his leadership team in addressing this. So I hope I can give you as a committee assurance that we are absolutely taking this seriously and are determined that there is genuine progress going to be made here.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Chief Executive, did you want to add anything further? Obviously, leadership comes directly under your portfolio. Have you anything further you'd like to add?
I think
that's what you made.
Absolutely, and I think first of all, it's kind of personal leadership and then organisational leadership, and the two come together in many respects. But from a personal perspective, I'm pretty clear about kind of the responsibility I have as chief executive for championing improvement in children's services across the council. Bringing together our partners and ensuring that the collective responsibility that we have across our partners is delivered, and that our partners are held accountable for delivering their part of the bargain. And we work with them to make sure that they do that. I think equally, the responsibility I have, chief executive, is ensuring that corporate support is in place across all corners of the council, not just in terms of corporate support services, but all parts of the council. So when we have our Herefordshire Sustainable Growth Board meetings on a fortnightly basis to look at how we develop our levelling up bids and our stakeholder responsibility funds, then I'm going to be pretty clear with them about my expectation of them as business leaders and the opportunities they can provide for employment and apprentices for our care leaders. Because, you know, that's the part of reaching parts of the county that perhaps we haven't got to before. And that we recognise that our business leaders have as much responsibility as we have. And similarly, you know, the 4 or 5 housing registered providers that we have in place equally have a responsibility. How can they step forward? So I take my responsibility seriously within the council, but also with our partners. Not just those that are in our immediate public sector family, who we will be working very closely with at chief constable level, but also those in the wider family across the public and community and voluntary sector, who we need to ensure that they play their part in improving outcomes for children and young people. And they recognise the responsibility that they have for reaching back into their own organisations and how they can make the opportunities for those who are most vulnerable and greatest need across the organisation. Yes, we've got a very strong programme management arrangements in place, which is being led by my head of the Chief Executive's office, Johnny Hughes here. And what we've done is taken each one of the corporate leadership team and given them the corporate leadership role for each one of the programme areas, to strengthen corporate parenting across the council and across the county. Hilary Hall, who's the Corporate Director of Community Wellbeing, will be leading that work as a lead officer. You know, then that's a huge step forward for us, both in terms of the corporate approach, recognising corporate parenting isn't just about children's services, and that the corporate leadership team there is acting corporately and taking responsibility for making those things happen. So you can well imagine I can talk for some time about the corporate approach, because we have a solid, committed and a determined approach. I'm happy to go into more detail another time, Chair, but I hope that initial summary is helpful.
Yeah, I think I hope I speak for all the committee in saying you've all given fulsome, very positive responses to the question. So thank you for that. Councillor Andrews, you're happy that your questions have been answered. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm happy with that question. Thank you very much for the answers.
I know, Councillor, you want to ask another question under this heading?
Well, it comes in under heading number 2, doesn't it? Are we on 2? Yeah, we are.
No, not yet, no. Anybody else want to add anything under leadership before we move on? Yeah.
I can't see. It was mentioned that one of the underlying problems is the fact of it's difficult to recruit and retain staff. And I just wondered.
We are coming under that, under the work.
Oh, you're going to come. Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't see it.
No,
I couldn't see it elsewhere.
later on,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
we'll cover it then. Thank you. Any other questions before we go on to the next heading? Okay, so thank you for those answers. The next heading is corporate responsibility. And this is where we're going to obviously ask the questions on the current guiding expose of information. Councillor Lee, you want to
Well, yeah, I'm hoping everybody can hear me because I really can't hear lots of you who are at your microphone. So maybe it's time for me to put my hearing aid in.
Can you hear?
Can you all hear me?
Can you hear?
Yes. Good. Okay, so you know the most fruitful things can come out of the most difficult questions, and it's. I think I'm speaking for all scrutiny members and probably members of the public as well, that it's very uncomfortable to have a sudden piece of information emerge in a national newspaper. And without going through all your assurance, I mean, I could ask you the same question. Did you know? Did you know? Did you know? But I'm not going to do that because I actually think I looked through the assurances update on the children's legal team. And lots of the principles that were in this update, and this is May 2021, the principles that are at work here apply, and they are about corporate leadership. So there is basically, my question is, by what avenues can we understand both the assessments for financial risk to children's services from these cases, and by what avenues should members and can members be made aware? And here, I must stress, I'm not asking for particular case details. What we're asking for is, so when we had this update in May 2021, I remember quite clearly that our chair here asked, are legal services conversant and trained in the Human Rights Act? And the answer was yes. And actually, what we discover in this newspaper report is lots of those cases have been brought under particular articles of the Human Rights Act. And we will be asking further questions for information as to what they are. So there'll be an information request later on. But at this point, what I want to know is the things that were raised in this update from legal services were about failures in communication. I mean, I've just dotted down the side. Who knows who? And what legal services did at that time was that they made an open door. So instead of social workers having to go through to team managers when they needed a legal question answered, they could go directly. But if what's happening is that they're going directly, getting an answer that they don't understand or that's not clear, and then they're going back into their practice, how have we any assurance that those social workers are then deeply enough trained in what they need to understand about Human Rights Act and the way that operates within their social work in order for these cases not to crop up? So, my question is, can we please, leadership, look at how this sort of information, which makes a big impact on the finances of children's services and makes an untold impact on families that are already struggling, then having to go through litigation. Can we look, please, at ways in which members can understand what risks are coming forward, what financial risks are coming forward, but also whether we're actually improving on our understanding of our duties under the Human Rights Act so that our families and children aren't impacted. So big question, and
quite a lot of detail.
I'm not asking for each of you to tell me whether you knew, because I'm sure somebody somewhere did, but members didn't know and scrutiny didn't know. And it does feel like a similar place to the CSO report. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully we can iron this out by saying we need to look at where the information journey goes. So that's my challenge. Can we make sure that we look at that information journey, please?
And there are two aspects to that, the financial implications and legal implications, which I think we should get information from both. Who would like to respond initially?
So, yes, we can and we should look at the process. So payments from human rights cases, like any other case, can arrive in a number of different ways. They can arrive from formal court judgments, they can arrive from legal settlement, and from claims through our insurers in general terms. Okay. The council's constitution formally empowers various qualified legal staff to agree those payments on behalf of the council. And typically then, where payments arise from care proceedings or insurance claims, the senior managers or if requested legal services can agree those. There's a difficulty that to disclose too much information could potentially put us in breach or in contempt of court in some instances, or breach the confidentiality of individual families. So I'm absolutely open to working with you to think about the process about how we do that. Members might recall that there was an article in the Hereford Times on the 26th of May this year that was very public about the fact that a significant amount of money had been paid out in cases the previous year. So lots of people were aware through a published Freedom of Information request. It's also been a feature on the council's risk register, I think since 2012, that there was always a risk, and there continues to be a risk of litigation against the council that might come through service users of children's services, adult services, and in fact of almost any directorate in the council. That's a corporate risk. So through the Audit and Governance Committee, there's a line of sight to the fact that there is a risk. But for a variety of reasons, then some of the specific circumstances aren't routinely shared through some of those forums because of the risk of contempt of court or breaching confidentiality. But you're asking a question, can we look at that? And I'm saying, yes, we can and we should.
So that's a great answer. So we will be asking for some information. Scrutiny will be asking. So what I'd like to ask is, what strategy do we have to reduce that risk on our risk register? What would be the best strategy in your mind to reduce the risk of litigation? Given that, and I'll give you a start at the 10, they're all human rights cases.
Because that's generally the litigation that, unless somebody trips and falls, so that generally is the framework by which any individual can sue a local authority. So, but I think answering the original question, for me, it's about, this Ofsted report is really clear that the quality of our social work practice is poor. It has been for years, and we're starting to see improvement from a very low base. So until we get that very low base up to a very high benchmark, which is where our aspiration and our ambition is, there is always a risk.
So my final question triages those two, which is, okay, we've talked about training CPD, and Councillor Toynbee talked, and we're both from a teaching background. We've had conversations that a lot of that CPD actually happened on online self-assessment. And I know as a teacher that online self-assessment is a very weak tool in which to embed good practice. So what I'd like to see is much more I know the supervision's going up, and that's the commitment. There's much more face-to-face embedding of that online self-assessment, as well as good advice coming back from legal in order to embed that quality of practice.
And again, I'm very happy to support that and agree with you in terms of the direction of travel. So, for example, we've got some face-to-face training with local judiciary in the family courts scheduled in the very near future, so that less experienced social workers and others can kind of learn some of the court skills that are required when you're in front of a judge in a family court. We have lunchtime learning sessions, practice development sessions, all based here at Powell Lane and other offices. So we're doing much more of that face to face. There is absolutely an additional qualitative value when you can do learning with peers and with partners from other agencies on a face to face, which is quite different and I think better generally than some of the e-learning or Teams type based learning. But I think that there's a value to a hybrid approach to it.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Just a cabinet member, we're concerned about two things, I think, as scrutiny. One is that the Russell members know about the amounts of payments that are made. We understand the sensitivity of individual cases and we wouldn't expect that, but a question about why that sort of information isn't more freely shared with members so we know what we're paying. But we're particularly concerned that there seems to be an upsurge of families who are being very conscious that we've been found to be poor in delivering, and there seems to be quite a number of people who feel they've got cases to make it against the council. And a question is, we've obviously not been aware of what's happened in the past, but how confident are we that we're aware of what our liabilities are likely to be in future in order to make sure we manage the risk of perhaps even greater costs than current experience? Because I think that's an important question that we need to satisfy with our members of the council and the public.
Thank you. I can't answer specifically about assurances of what potential liabilities for the future would be, but I'll hand over to my colleague about relating to audit governance, risk registers, and that element of it.
It's a risk assessment type of question, I think, essentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, audit and governance are responsible for the process by which risk is assessed and having making a judgment on whether that process is robust. The risk registers are reported at least twice a year to audit and governance. And I mean, I don't know when you as a committee last reviewed the corporate risk register associated with Children's Directorate. But if you didn't, then perhaps that's something that should be on your work programme and that you should be aware of, because the risks to the council associated with potential litigation around human rights as a consequence of social work cases has been on the risk register, I think, as the officer said, since 2012-ish, and remains on the risk register now. The last time I could see that audit and governance had the risk register come to them was in February, and the risk associated with human rights cases was still there. It's still a live corporate risk. And it is back in 2016. It was. I've got an example of some of the. There's text there covering the various mitigating measures and actions that are taken in order to try and reduce the overall risk. But it is always going to be there. I think corporately, the fact of those risks being there and that they are managed and regularly reviewed within the directorates demonstrate that officers are aware of and are continuously assessing those risks. The degree to which it is appropriate for us individually or collectively to be appraised of the detail of individual cases which represent that risk is another matter in time. And as the Chief Executive and Director have already said, there are, a myriad of sensitivities around that. What I will say is that the legal team and corporate do hold budget provision, not just against litigation in this specific area, but against many different litigation risks for us as a council. And that financial reserve is held and is reviewed as part of the budgeting process. in terms of whether it is sufficient. And, you know, it may well be the case that we need to consider whether that reserve is adequate to meet the threat that we have as a consequence of the Ofsted report and what parents and campaign groups may wish to do as a consequence of that. But as Councillor Toynbee has said, you know, our ability and to judge that right now and our visibility of those risks is emerging.
That's a very considered answer. Thank you. I know Chief Executive, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, if I may, I think to some real practical examples here. When I first joined Herefordshire, I was concerned that we wouldn't spend 2 or 3 years looking over our shoulder waiting for the next High Court judgment to come along. And one of the things to mitigate that was that we commissioned a review of all our open cases. So we looked at all of those open cases in terms of the judgments that have been made and the assessments that have been made, and whether, you know, there was any further action that we needed to take. And you may remember, following the High Court judgment, in that May to September period in particular, we held a number of member briefings, because members quite rightly were concerned as to the issues that were happening within children's services at the time, not least of which around cases. And if you remember, we referred to them as legacy cases, and we prepared some very sensitive information and shared with members about those legacy cases, not the detail of the case, but the cases that we had in place. So, you know, we were able to do 2 things. One is to share the information we could about those legacy cases. And secondly, you know, to mitigate and address the risk going forward was to review those open cases. And we did that well, and we brought that work to a conclusion in December. And those legacy cases, you know, were coming through the process and procedures now. So we're aware of that, and I think, to be fair, I've done our best within the realms of confidentiality to share the legacy cases we were dealing with, and we were doing that last summer and early autumn. I think in terms of here today and now, you know, there's a judgment call here upon Darryl as a corporate director. You know, if he becomes advised of a particular payment that needs to be made of a judgment, then, you know, it's for Darryl to decide in his judgment as to brief the cabinet member and or cabinet within the realms of confidentiality and not being a breach of court. So I wouldn't want anybody to think that that wouldn't happen, because it would in terms of a senior officer using his or her judgment in that respect. I think we should need to recognise that would happen. I think in terms of a track record, yes, we've shared with members, as we did last summer. We've also addressed risk through reviews of open cases. And if there was something to happen today, and I think, to be fair, having just checked, you know, that hasn't happened on Darryl's watch thus far. But if it was to, you know, then he would use his judgment as to making the cabinet member aware of that. I think there's, you know, formalising the escalation process. At the moment, that relies on judgment, on the judgment of the senior officer, which is based on openness and transparency, which is how we operate.
People, I think that answers the questions you raised, Councillor Hewitt. Councillor Fagan, I think you wanted another question in this area.
I did. Thank you. Can you hear me?
That's better.
The question is actually for Councillor Toynbee, and it's around the corporate parenting in the administration, which has been floundering for the duration, really. What steps will you take to ensure that there's an effective offer to facilitate all councillors to participate in meaningful improvement in corporate parenting?
Yeah, good question. Yes, as you know, that it is very overdue, and all members are aware that they're corporate parents. They all want to be corporate parents. They want it to be concrete. They want it to be meaningful. And there hasn't been enough clarity around that yet. I'm really pleased that we've got new people in now who are working on that, and it is overdue. As you heard earlier from the Chief Executive, he is really committed to this and making it actually happen across the council. And also the Corporate Director of Community Wellbeing, her new role is also championing, you know, the children and young people in our care and care leavers across the whole council. So I am optimistic about that. There's still a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of work still to do on creating the right forums for us to be listening directly to the young people in our care and our care leavers. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, happy with answer, Councillor Fagan.
Could I just ask,
Of course.
one other sort of, are there key sort of areas in corporate parenting that have been identified and actions that are already in place?
Yeah, I think, yes, there are a lot. We've got a corporate parenting board next week. I'm certainly, you know, recruiting more foster care. Quite a lot of good work's been done recruiting more foster carers, supporting foster carers better, training foster carers, and especially another key one is that participation and engagement. That more work needs to be done on, and we are doing. Yeah. And as you said, making corporate parenting meaningful to members and to wider partnership within the county, as the Chief Executive was saying earlier, because we talk a lot about opportunities and transition and, you know, apprenticeships and everything, but we've got to actually get more concrete about it.
Thank you. Further comment on the GCS then, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, answering Councillor Fagan's question as well. So there's a real focus at the minute on support for care leavers. So the Ofsted report found that our local offer for care leavers was weak, needed considerably more work. We've got National Care Leavers Week coming up in a few weeks' time, and we're currently planning a whole load of activities there, which we'll bring into the corporate parenting board when they meet next week, and working with care leavers to look at the local offer and to hear from them how they think we can improve. So the real focus at the minute around the local offer for care leavers, that's a significant priority. So you'll know from the Ofsted report, in fact, it's critical of our offer for children care and care leavers across the board. So there's a lot to do.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, I think I'd just like personally to make a plea for everybody to recognise that the term corporate parenting is not necessarily about us individually as councillors behaving as parents would to the children that we collectively as a local authority look after. What every member of this committee is doing right now is fulfilling in part the role of being a corporate parent, because you are holding the authority to account. It is a governance issue. It is an issue of accountability. It is collectively taking responsibility for the actions that the authority takes as in the role of parent on behalf of us all towards the children in the authority's care. The Corporate Parenting Board has oversight of more parenting type activities that the authority undertakes. But I think we as councillors should recognise that in our roles in scrutiny, in our roles in various different ways of fulfilling governance responsibilities, that is corporate parenting also. And it doesn't necessarily, if you're not, you know, if you don't know who the children are who live in your ward, who are looked after children, that doesn't matter. That's not part of being a corporate parent. This is being a corporate parent, and more things like it. So I think as councillors, it would be really helpful for us all to have that broader view of the governance and accountability scrutiny roles that actually discharge the corporate bit of corporate parenting, and that we know that that's what we're doing when we do it.
Thank you. Good reminder. I think we will recognise that. I think last point on this, I'd like to ask the Head of Law and Legal Business Partnerships who's here on the meeting. There was a comment made about how well do legal feel they really are trained on cases where we've had all these payments for HRA Act cases that people brought against us. Would you like any comment on the question that was asked about that?
No, I don't. The cases in terms of claims against the local authority will be dealt with by a different team that I don't manage, so I don't have that information available.
Okay, so we need to ask a different member of the team that question. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, who would that be?
Francis Fernandez is the head of legal, so as the officer, he would be able to answer that.
So we need to address a question directly to head of legal. Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this particular subject?
No, I just addressed the issue directly to Clerk or to the Director of Legal
Yes,
and
okay.
Services, and I'll get an answer directly from Claire.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that advice and update. Yes, go on, ask a question.
Yeah, so maybe this is to Councillor Harvey, I don't know. And thank you for making us aware that we need to pull our socks up and have the corporate risk register for children come to scrutiny. So that's something we will definitely action. But what I want to know is, how does our corporate risk assessment compare with other comparative authorities in this area? Do you have that information, or is our risk higher than other authorities? Is it lower? Can we say anything about that at this point, or is that something you can come back to me on?
I don't have the detail on that. I would imagine that each local authority's assessment of its risk in the area specifically of litigation on human rights matters will be a function of the care cases that they are handling, which themselves will be influenced by their local demographic and the needs and risks and demands that are out there in the local environment that are impinging on children and their families. So I don't know whether looking at this specific item on the risk register is going to tell us much. I think it might be, as you say, helpful for the committee to consider the risk register for the directorate as a whole, and to, through inquiry, determine whether you feel it's covering the areas that you would expect to see, and maybe to bone up a bit on the overall assessment process, which is a bit of an overlap with audit and governance, but really to sort of understand the thought processes that officers go through in coming to those judgments about the unmitigated risk, and then the mitigated risk as a consequence of the actions that are identified in the risk register.
Yeah, noted that as a key action for us to take on board, Councillor Harvey. Thank you. I'm going to move on now to the next heading, which is MASH. We'll get to response questions. And Councillor Jones, I know you had a question in that area for us.
Yes. It was extremely upsetting to hear the accounts from parents at our extraordinary full council meeting about Drifton today, particularly from one lady who had a newborn taken away. But the one I was going to ask about MASH is, why is it that there is not a robust and timely multi-agency response to children who go missing, or 16 and 17-year-olds who present as homeless? Can you do that? Or sorry, do you want to?
Would you like to respond to that?
So thank you for the question. I think in part it's a mix of insufficient resources in the right parts of the system, and also a lack of a multi-agency strategy in the past. So different parts of the service and the system working sometimes in isolation of each other. Again, that was something that Ofsted fed back to us that we'd recognised and were working on. We have an exploitation team who deal with the missing return home interviews, for example, when a child or young person goes missing, but then that information isn't always linked into other systems to make sure that risk assessment is updated. We've been doing quite a lot of work with the MASH strategic partnership and police and health to make sure that that's better now and more robust than it previously was. So some of it is kind of summarised by the sentence in the Ofsted report, really, which was about underdeveloped partnerships. Over a period of time, either arrangements that had been in place have been impacted, perhaps by COVID and lockdown, or by austerity cuts in different parts of the service, and then the partnership per se not having a sufficient grip on that. Excuse me, I just choke. And that's something that the multi-agency safeguarding of the partnership, strategic partnership group that we set up in the spring this year has been very much focused on. And I'm really confident that when Ofsted come back, as they will in the spring next year, they'll see a very different picture.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got one more. Thank you for that. Yeah. How many of our looked after children are currently in private fostering arrangements? And what resource has the authority been able to put to checking on these arrangements, and how many of these arrangements are creating upset for our looked after children?
So a private fostering arrangement isn't a looked after child. So when a child is privately fostered, they're not one of our looked after children. So there's a kind of a legal and technical difference. There are two children in private fostering arrangements. So a private fostering arrangement is where a child goes to live with perhaps a family friend or an extended relative, someone who's not a direct blood relative, for more than 30 days. So sometimes, for example, hypothetically, a child might go to live with a relative or a family friend because of some disruption going on in the family house. The family house might have got flooded, needs to go and live with somewhere else. In the short term, that's fine. That's a family arrangement. Once you go over a certain amount of time, days, and the local, then the family has a duty to report that to the local authority, and the local authority has a duty to assess that arrangement to make sure that the welfare and well-being of the child is good enough. At the time of the inspection, the inspectors found one arrangement that wasn't caught within that mechanism. We were providing support, but it wasn't recognised that it was a private fostering arrangement. The partnership has a response for raising awareness. So the safeguarding partnership and the broader partnership has a response for raising awareness in Herefordshire of what a private fostering arrangement is. In my experience, and typically it's an underreported incidence because families often make arrangements and either don't know or don't necessarily want to inform the local authority that made those arrangements, and it might only come to light in certain circumstances. So there are currently two privately fostered children. It doesn't have an impact on our general looked after child population, although those arrangements have to be assessed and then reviewed and any support provided. It's very small numbers in Herefordshire, as it is in many local authorities.
Okay, thank you. And any other comments that any other members of officers or current members like to make? I think particularly one of the things that we were concerned about, the relationship and the treatment with the MASH and other statutory parties such as the local safeguarding board were not as effective as they should be. So what steps do we feel we should be making to improve that, to make sure we address that particular aspect of the critique that we had from Ofsted?
So there was absolutely an issue and something of a concern to all of us when Ofsted came, that some children were left waiting for a strategy discussion or a strategy meeting longer than any of us would like. So a strategy meeting, just for councillors and for anybody watching, is a meeting of key agencies, so often typically police, the school if it's a school-age child, health and social care. So where you consider that a child is at risk of harm or is actually suffering harm, you should bring those key partners together for a strategy meeting. And there shouldn't be significant delay in that because you recognise as a risk. So Ofsted did find that in a small number of cases there was a delay, and that was primarily due, as they put in their report, to a lack of availability from the police at that point, which was complicated by a lack of co-location and other stuff. Again, they put a qualifier statement in the inspection report. So straight away, Paul, Chief Exec, and myself were on the phone to senior officers and others about this needs to be sorted. It needs to be sorted today. We got a good and immediate response from our partner agencies, and Ofsted recognised that in the report, and we have put in place systems and weekly tracking and monitoring to make sure that that didn't just improve the 2 weeks Ofsted were on site, it continued to improve, and it's in place. I've taken over as chair of the safeguarding partnership as of last week, and I have asked that the multi-agency partners receive the raw data for July, August and September, and then undertake some multi-agency audits of both the timeliness and the quality of strategy meetings in the MASH. Not all strategy meetings happen in MASH, some will happen in other parts of the wider children's service. But the partnership is very alert to and aware of that particular failing that happened during this inspection, and the partnership is working with Paul and myself to take responsibility and share the responsibility.
Okay, thank you. Any comment from you, Cabinet members, either of you, to add to that?
Yeah, just to say that, you know, we hear a lot about partnership working and multi-agency, this, that and the other. And it's really important that we identify key people, key decision makers, because sometimes we get meetings that are lots of, you know, very sort of top level people at a very sort of super structure level. And then we also have people working at local level in teams together, which is really important. So it's at all levels that it's got to be clear what our relationships are, how we work together. And at my level, in my role, I'm identifying key people who we can build a relationship with, key decision makers, so that, because it's all about relationships, and that's what we need to build on, rather than having, you know, huge meetings where which aren't focused enough.
Thank you. To my mind, I was quite concerned personally as a member reporting a case that had been reported to me of a child in potential risk of harm. I didn't get a response from the MASH at all. It was only by doing it directly to officers that we got a response. So some reassurance, it isn't just about partnership, it's obviously about resources. We heard from the police, for example. But I understand that was a resource issue with the MASH. And literally no response ever came back, despite using all the methods that were available to contact them. Officers reacted very quickly, which is really great. But I just would like some reassurance that if somebody calls the MASH, there is going to be a resource available to actually get them to respond in some way. I've never had a response back in weeks, and I'm sure I'm not the only member which has happened. I understand it's a resource issue, but we do need to address that. So any reassurance in how we are addressing it will be appreciated.
Yeah, it could hardly be more important. I think the director's going to answer.
Yes.
So thanks for the question, Chair. So as part of the response to the inspection, we added additional management and social work capacity to the MASH, and we're having conversations with our partner agencies about future co-location. So we've created and reserved a dedicated space for the MASH bigger than it requires on the second floor of this building, and also created a dedicated strategy meeting room. So we put aside a space where we'll be able to have secure strategy meetings. We're about to put technology into that room, and our police colleagues will be joining us, I think, at the end of next week or the beginning of the week after. So that's a key and important co-location. It required a couple of IT issues to be resolved, but that's a really big step for us, and we have plans and ambitions to involve other agencies in a future co-location as that goes on. One of the technical issues that you encountered when you tried to engage with the MASH was, and you kind of helped us expose the issue really, was that the way that the telephone hunt group was set up, which meant that it didn't just go to the next person, it went to an answer machine on that particular thing. That was a technical issue at the time, which has been resolved, and we are currently we're developing and working a way that so when anyone contacts the MASH, that we get to a point where we will routinely respond, at least to say your your referral has been dealt with or processed, even if we can't come back to you with the personal details of stuff and family's details. That's not routinely happening at the minute. That's something we're working on. That's an issue about IT systems and capacity and secure emails and the like as well. So we're working on a solution to that at the minute, so that will be the case in the future.
Reassuring that the resource and the co-location sounds good. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on now to heading 4, which was support services.
Can I just make a quick observation?
Yes, you'd like to have a question.
Am I correct in my understanding that you're going to be chair of Herefordshire Child Safeguarding Partnership? Is that correct?
That is correct. It's generally rotated through the 3 strategic partners.
Yes, well, I think there may be a potential almost conflict of interest, because one of the topics we were thinking of examining is actually sort of scrutinising the safeguarding. So it's a bit difficult in a way to scrutinise yourself if you're actually the chair. I'd just say that's a potential downside to it. In my opinion.
If I may, so it's definitely not a conflict of interest in my role. My role is one of the 3 strategic partners of the Safeguarding Partnership, and it's quite traditional that the Director of Children's Services chairs that board. I'm not a member of the Scrutiny Committee. I'm an officer that reports to the Scrutiny Committee. So as long as Scrutiny Committee is aware that I'm both the Director of Children's Services and, for the year ahead, the chair of the Safeguarding Partnership, I don't anticipate there'll be a conflict.
Remind us, the 3 partners are police, council
and health. So you've got the chief nurse, you've got Ed Williams as the police superintendent, and myself as the delegated 3 strategic safeguarding partners, acting on behalf of the chief constable, chief executive, and the chief executive of the ICB.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on then to item 4, support services. Councillor Anderson, have you got to ask a question, please?
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Right, this is a question to the Cabinet Member for Children's and Families. What assurances can you provide that the availability of support and services for timely access to therapeutic interventions, access to dentistry, life story work, emotional and mental health support, help for young people to support transitions into independence, and sufficient suitable accommodation being improved? How is it being improved?
Okay, that's a clear question. Councillor Tugby?
Yes, thank you. That covers quite a lot. Included in there are a couple of things that unfortunately are outside our direct control, but that we're lobbying really hard on, for example, dentistry, which I agree is really important. As I said earlier, as far as corporate parenting is concerned, we're doing some really concerted and focused work on that now, as you know, and I'll be seeing you in the meeting next week. And I'm really grateful that you keep pushing on this, because it is so important and it is really overdue. And as I said earlier, also, as far as transition is concerned, there's some good work going on now between adults and children's directorates, because obviously that's where the transition happens. And our new Director of Community Wellbeing is pushing on that, which is good. As far as assurances is concerned, on progress, I know that you as a committee are in touch with our senior leaders in terms of, what processes are in place. Obviously we're drawing up a plan for Ofsted, which is going to be merged with the transformation plan. And I know that you will have your own systems and structures and briefings and workshops and task and finish and the right forums for making sure that you do have obviously it's an ongoing process, that you do have that assurance as we go forward, because that's what you're here for. And we'll be judged on the results.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, are there any questions on support services? We'll move on to the next heading. Thank you. Performance and quality assurance. Sam, I know that was one of the theme questions you put to us. If I could like to ask you a question, please.
Yeah, thank you. So some of this has been covered a little earlier, but for me, whenever we talk about improvement plans, often the same words are used, and we've used them already a few times today. It's things like we're going to review, we're going to evaluate, we're going to monitor, we're going to look at, we're going to reconsider. What I was interested in is what actual evidence of change can we point to over the past 12 months with this leadership in place that should give us real confidence that you've been spotting things and actually changing things, because not a lot of it was picked up in the Ofsted report. So actual evidence of change is what I was asking for.
Thank you for the question. So what Ofsted were clear about in the report is that we've spent a lot of time in the last 12 months kind of managing crises and kind of managing a very rapidly changing system and building the infrastructure for future improvement. So some of that has been, and where we have made significant impact, is to add a great deal of extra capacity to the service and to bring caseloads down. So when I joined the service at the end of last year, it was not uncommon to encounter social workers with caseloads in the 50s and 60s. So cases of one child, that's just unworkable, it's unmanageable, it's not right for families, and it certainly isn't right for social workers. So the average caseload now is 18, but there's a span either side of that. Clearly, there are still some workers with caseloads in the mid-20s. But we're pushing down on that. That has meant that there is space to introduce more practice standards, increase supervision with managers, and start to improve the quality of practice. Again, Ofsted recognised small improvement in recent months, but the subject of this report is too little too late. It's taken such a long time. Also, if you look at the longer term history, and both Paul and I have kind of used the term long-standing and deep-rooted in different forum, I think, this was a children's service that was inadequate in 2012, required improvement in 2014, required improvement again with inadequate leadership and governance in 2018. It's been hobbling along the bottom for at least a decade, and to get to inadequate in 2012, it must have been in a poor state before. So a lot of the basic systems and infrastructure have not been in place and weren't in place anyway when I got here. A lot of the performance reports I was receiving were Word documents that by the time you receive them at a senior level, they're a month old already because you spent that long collating the data and Excel spreadsheets. We now have a performance and management information framework based on Power BI. It's just a platform, but it pulls the data from our systems overnight, every night, and it's updated. And I see managers using that every day. I have conversations with managers about that every day. So I think what this report, the Ofsted report, tells us in really stark terms is that actually that isn't yet making a difference for children and young people. And that needs to be a concern for me and my team and for this scrutiny committee. But it is really clear, and I'm really clear, that we've been building the infrastructure over the last 9 months or so that I've been in this permanent role. And there were just so many gaps in our knowledge. We will be tested, I will be tested, not only by this scrutiny committee going forward, but when Ofsted come back in the spring next year and in subsequent monitoring visits. And we also have a children's commissioner right now who meets with me weekly and meets with Paul and others on a weekly basis, and who has a really clear and tight timescale and remit to respond. When Ofsted start their monitoring visits in the spring next year, the first one they don't publish the report for, but all subsequent ones then they publish on their website. So the first one is just a kind of an alignment process. Let's look at your plan, check that you're on track, you're doing the right things, and that we're starting to address the 9 areas for improvement that were identified in this Ofsted report. But thereafter, their view on our improvements and the pace is a matter of public record, and no doubt a matter of debate here at Scrutiny. So, it's my regret and the regret I think of everybody in my service that improvement hasn't been faster than it is. I think Ofsted were really clear in their report because they used the phrase several times in the report. This is a service trying to improve from a really low base.
Okay, yes, you've got a follow-up.
Just a quick follow-up. Yeah, so quick question about pace, because I mean the Ofsted inspection was in nearly 3 months ago.
Yeah.
So almost, what are the big ticket items that we've done since the report? And what are the big ticket items that we need to do in order to convince the Children's Commissioner that this council has the ability to turn this around?
Yeah, so slightly, I think there's a slightly different audience there and a slightly different focus of big tickets in some of that. So for the Children's Commissioner, if I work backwards, the Children's Commissioner task, if you like, for the Secretary of State is Should Herefordshire Council retain control and management of its own children's services? And if the answer to that is yes, can it do it on its own, or does it need some support? And if the answer to that is no, then what might be the alternative provision for children's services in Herefordshire? So in order to help Eleanor Brazil reach a conclusion and make a recommendation, that's absolutely some of the questions that behind that are, is there full corporate support? Are members asking the right questions? Is Scrutiny Cabinet and full council aligned to an ambition for children and young people in Herefordshire? Has the director, myself, and members of the corporate leadership team, are we clear about our aspiration and our ambition? Are the right resources in place for children's services? And those aren't just financial. That's about the question earlier on about HR, for example, and our performance and management information and systems. And is our plan focused on the right things? Because again, if it's not, by the time we get to submitting it on the 20th of December, then that almost answers Eleanor's question for her. In terms of the big tickets for Ofsted, Ofsted were very clear. They felt that the response in the MASH wasn't good enough in terms of the multi-agency response to risk and strategy meetings, and that there wasn't sufficient management oversight of decisions in the MASH. I know, and we can report if asked when to come back at some point in future, but that's a very different picture now. And then when Ofsted come in March next year, as I expect, they'll find a very different experience in the MASH, and they'll find a very different experience in terms of referrals to the MASH as well. Another area of significant risk they talked about in the inspection was children who are in the public law outline. So there's a stage before we go to court, it's called pre-proceedings, and there was evidence of drift and delay in that. So we've reviewed each of those cases, and with our legal colleagues, we have a much more robust system in place now for monitoring and tracking that and weekly legal gateway meetings. So again, it will look and feel very different when Ofsted come in. Those are big tickets in terms of some of the key areas of risk. Some of the other challenges around recruitment, retention, raising practice standards, having permanent managers rather than local managers, those aren't going to be in place by December, and they aren't going to be in place by March, but we will be able to demonstrate that we're making the right decisions and starting to do the right thing.
Okay, you happy with that? I guess the key point is that we don't know yet, but we've been reassured the systems are in place. I think your key point about all those systems have demonstrated sufficient improvement by the 12-week period to satisfy the Commissioner that we can carry on delivering the service. I might be worth just reiterating that point, Paul. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. I think it's fair for me to say this. I think we probably didn't realise who the service was or is, and what a low base we were operating from in some areas. And you might say, well, you should have known. And we're quite justified in saying that, but I think the reality is, the service wasn't, it was in their report. The starting point here was probably worse than we thought it was at the time. So the small progress which they recognise we've made has been, come about through a lot of hard work and diligence through Darryl and the team in terms of, if you think about it, if you're a social worker who last May had a caseload of over 40, and now you're operating at 18 to 20, and you can spend that precious time with children and their families doing the delicate and complex work you need to do. That's a fundamental shift. What we haven't yet seen is the impact of that proven outcome for children and people. That's what we have to say. Some small movement which has been brought about by the investment the council's made, but they are a number of small steps that come together here.
So just to make a statement that whilst I accept that you may not have realised just how low the base was, for somebody who's worked in Herefordshire for 20 years in housing, in the church, in schools, it's really quite frustrating to hear, because as a key partner, we have told you of service failings and where referrals have been made and there have been sort of 8-9 week waiting lists for them to be seen by social workers. Yeah. That information has been told many times. So I accept it.
Yeah.
It's frustrating. I just wanted to feel able to express that frustration.
No, and if I may, Chairman, just Frank, and I'm really pleased you did. Thank you, Sam, for saying that. I think that's good. That's good for all of us to say that, because and Councillor Hewitt heard me say this before, as Councillor Harvey asked and Councillor Toynbee. This is council-wide failure. We've all had a responsibility to bear here. We are here as the manager, managing and delivering the service, and I accept the responsibility that goes with that. But the report talks about scrutiny by the council. It doesn't necessarily. That doesn't mean the scrutiny committee. It means the council as a whole, per se, all the time.
Yeah,
and I've heard similar responses. We had some similar responses from head teachers, the improvement board, the week before last. Who were saying exactly the same. And there's something important and valid about listening to that, and why it's not been listened to previously. I'm taken on board.
And it sounds talking about, yes, our promises taken a long time before he taken on board, which now it has been, and that's good news. But our main reassurance is being one from yourselves that not only are the systems in place, but that they will now make a sufficient difference in the next 2 or 3 months for a commission to decide that actually we can enhance the services. You've given us pretty good answers for that. But I think the key point you were making was it is time we actually deliver and not just kept saying, yeah, well, we're being told nothing's happening. That's the key point we're making. Right, any other comments on that? Did you want to ask another question, Councillor? I want to move on to the other points.
Well, it is quite important. So the first thing is that report from Legal Services in May 2021, a bit like what Sam's saying, had the public law outline in there that was a failure. And so it's taken us 18 months to get to a point where we've gone, oh, yes, we must make that firmer. So we need pace. So that's the challenge. But I want to know whether you can claim any responsibility for the green shoots that were in the Ofsted report, because we had 3. We had the Edge of Care service, we had the virtual school, and we had the child exploitation team or strategy that were both singled out as working well. If we weren't responsible for the fact that they were working well, I mean, if this new team wasn't responsible, have you looked into what you can learn from them? Because they're obviously doing something pretty well in order to get anything good in this Ofsted report.
So they aren't green shoots, they're examples of good practice, and it was heartening to see those in this Ofsted report. Green shoots included reference to reducing caseloads, improved activity around quality assurance, improved use of performance and management information, and things like finally a permanent senior leadership team. They also caveated all of that was you still need to see, and they also talked about the strong governance arrangements for the improvement plan and the like. So those are the green shoots, and I think my team, with support of councillors, Scrutiny, and the corporate leadership team, can take some credit for that. I don't take credit for the Edge of Care team, the ECHO team, the virtual school, and the exploitation team, because they're long established, hard-working and committed teams. There is a question about why isn't some of that good practice more evident in other parts of the service, and we've certainly started to have some conversations and thinking about that. We had already started the work to develop and extend the, not necessarily the specifics of the ECHO team, but they take their practice and extend it in a different way, so that in terms of reducing the numbers of children in care going forward, or increasing the numbers of children that we can return home soon. And they have a very, very small resource that is dedicated to family group conferencing. And I've said in the past that that's something that we're already working on a business case to extend a family group conference model, so it's available to many more families in the future. So, so I think yes, those aren't green shoots, Councillor. Those are examples of really good practice, and I'm pleased that Ofsted found those. There were other green shoots in there which I would like to think and believe actually that the team that we're building now is responsible.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next item actually, which is monitoring and tracking. I think, Councillor Andrew, if you had a question on that area. You're mute at the moment.
I am, because you're catching me out by asking me a question I haven't thought was mine yet. Okay. I have 4 questions. Right, on tracking, what one of the items I was asked after was when we have two sort of work, I still see that you have two lot of work streams going on, that you have the existing cases to try and get yourself into a good performance on, and then also you've got the new cases that will come forward. What I'm trying to ask is, are you going to be able to track the difference between those two so they're both successful against the common cause, of which I guess you're going to put into your new cases, and you want to bring your future cases and past cases to the same conjunction of success? I'm a little bit concerned how you're going to do that, and just checking that your timelines match that versus the timelines that Mrs. Brazil is going to give you to be successful. When I wrote this question, I hadn't really thought about the overall question about them being asked if Hereford kept the services to themselves, or were they then put out to a trust. So I don't know how you're going to answer this one now. Perhaps you should take it that we will be successful and we will keep the services within Herefordshire and not go to a trust.
So I'll try and answer. It's not a very good connection, so you broke up a little bit there. So so Eleanor Brazil, the Children's Commissioner, isn't reporting on whether we have significantly improved by Christmas. Her report is on our capacity to improve. Obviously, we will have made some improvements between now and Christmas. We've made some improvements already since the inspection report, but her report is essentially on, are we doing the right things? Have we got the right plan and resources in place? And then, can we, over a period of time, deliver the improvement? She was very clear in the council meeting that that typically it takes several years for a local authority to raise its game to a point where it's no longer inadequate and should be considered to be good. Our ambition and our aspiration is high here. And speaking personally, I would hope that we will be able to demonstrate to her and enable her to make a recommendation to the Secretary of State that we should be able to hang on to our children's services and that we can make those improvements. But that is for her to look for the evidence and to speak to members and others and stakeholders as well in that process. In terms of the question around, I think you were asking around the kind of new cases and legacy cases and how you demonstrate improvement there. So we have clearly got almost two distinct types of activity. There's those new referrals coming through the front door, through the MASH, through early help and other areas where we need to make sure we get things off to the best possible start for them, so that they're not our legacy cases or cases of concern in the future. So one of the priorities of the service in October, and we've got three priorities we're very focused on in October. One of those is about the quality of assessment. So making sure that the MASH is making the right decisions and that our assessment teams are listening to and have regard to the comments and the criticism from Ofsted in this report about making sure we take into account the history in full, and that we look to the partnership information as well and we get those assessments off. And then through Phil, sat to my right, and his service and QA activity will be dip sampling and monitoring all of that. So if we get assessments right as people come into the service now and over the next few months, then that provides the platform and the foundation for good quality plans and good quality reviewing and monitoring. And then the point that I think you were raising was about cases that are already open to us, where some of the historical practice has not been as good as it should have been. And again, the work that we're doing at the minute is that through quality assurance, we are dip sampling and auditing those. So we're not just auditing new cases, and that we are asking our independent reviewing officers and our child protection conferences for those cases that are in that are either looked after or on child protection plans, that they look with rigor at those cases to make sure that that the circumstances for those children haven't changed since the point when they either became looked after or became subject to the child protection plan, and make sure that the quality of the plans and the assessments that are in place are sufficiently high. And we're starting to see quite a lot of activity going on at the moment. Through the championing of Councillor Toynbee and others, we want to set up the Listening to Families Forum, so we're also listening to families. I recently met with Parent Carer Voice and others. So we're trying to triangulate all of that through quality assurance activity, sitting down with our practitioners and with families, looking at our practice standards, and bringing that all together in the way that Ofsted do during the inspection. And obviously they're able to do that for very, very qualified and experienced inspectors spending 2 weeks doing that. They got underneath things in a way that some of our systems didn't do at that time. So there was a lot to learn from that process.
Thank you. You made a very important point about what the Commission is looking for about our capacity improvement rather than the actual improvements, because those do take time. And it's important for us all to recognise that that's what we should be scrutinising over the next few months, about whether that capacity is being put in place as expected. Did you want anything to add anything to that, Councillor Townley or Councillor Harvey?
I think Councillor Andrews has got something.
Yes, I'll come back to you in a second.
Oh no, go back to Councillor Andrews if you want.
First, okay. Did you want to add a point now before we ask further comment from the Cabinet member?
I'm happy to add it now if that's okay.
Yes, of course. That's a asking you. Yeah.
So what I'd like to say, Darryl, thank you very much for that. Is the bit I'm a little bit cautious on now is whilst it's really generous to say we're going to do that, and that's your ambition to go and do, and I have 100% confidence that you will try to deliver that. The item I want to make sure that we are covering is that previous directorates have said they will do that, and we have those reports and we get it back in, and we haven't seen them. Within the quality assurance that's in the directorate now, and supporting the cabinet people to do the best role that they can, and the officers in those roles, I'm looking for assurance that we can go back to give the Herefordshire public that you are really delivering something that we will know 100% is auditable, is 100% available to be seen, and is able to show the progression from the low point, which you've described really well, to saying this is what you came in to discover, to the ambitious place where we'd like to go. And I would like to support your ambition in saying that I really hope you are successful in trying to get that high level, because Herefordshire deserves that for what it has for the people in the county. But I think we must really, really try to promote the openness of the council and the work that's being done to ensure that they really support the work that you're trying to do and to deliver. So how are you going to ensure that audit and governance is there that was missing previously?
Okay, thank you for the question. So I'm not going to comment on previous directors of children's services, which you mentioned there. I'll speak about life on my watch, if you like. So feedback from members so far is actually I've taken a very transparent and open and honest approach with member briefings, both here and in other forum, and I will continue to work in that vein. I think the circumstances that we're in right now mean that this is also going to be one of the most scrutinised children's services in the country for the next couple of 3 years, in terms of regular monitoring visits from Ofsted and a very public profile, a children's commissioner for the next year, a reinvigorated Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee, regular reports to Cabinet and Council, and the engagement that I want to see and that I'm championing in a minute, so we have more involvement with families. I'll absolutely be judged on my impact and on the performance and the improvement over the service, because it will be a very, very public journey. And I trust that you and other councillors will ask searching questions and hold me to account and hold my team to account through that process.
Thank you. Victor, you wanted to have a point. Sorry, just before I go, are you happy now with that answer, Councillor Andrews? Thank you.
Right, so my supplementary question keeps changing by the minute. But basically, and thank you for all the answers. It's important to say thank you, and thank you for the answer. It's good to hear your response at an incredibly difficult time. So that's reassuring. But the word capacity is an incredibly important one, and the effect of an inadequate in Ofsted is incredibly damaging. You can't go round it. It's there. It hurts. And basically, then saying that you have got the capacity is a natural reaction to say we have the capacity, we have the people in place, we have the plans in place, we have the right words in the right documents, etc. But I don't think there's anything wrong if you look in industry or if you look at schools with actually going somewhere where it is working very well and piggybacking for the time that it takes to get you up to that level. And the reason I ask the question is the timescale to good is a long timescale. the issues in Herefordshire will still keep happening. So however you can get there quickly, I feel is very important. As a scrutiny committee, I would want to make sure that as a member of the scrutiny committee, I want to make sure that you are actually looking at that capacity issue and being incredibly honest about whether or not you have the capacity to actually move as quickly as you possibly can. Sorry if that's a statement and not a
No,
question.
there's definitely a question in there. So I've been really clear all along. So I don't think I've ever said we've got capacity to do this on our own. I'm really clear about that. And with support from the cabinet member and from the chief exec, we are asking for help and seeking support both from the Department for Education and from sector-led improvement partners. We're reaching out and have been reaching out to local authorities who have been on this, had been through this experience and have got from inadequate to good. Some local authorities have done that in 4 years, others take 8 years, 2 inspection cycles. That will depend on a whole range of circumstances. I'm keen that we set our ambition as a council high so that we don't settle for being requires improvement to be good as our next staging post. If this is about children and young people in Herefordshire, and it is, then that's what our services should be good, and we should get there in the most expeditious way that we can over time. And that will include, and that's part of the work that Paul's been leading on, in making sure that the full resource of the council is behind the improvement activity, that we're holding our partner agencies to account to make sure they're with us as well, and that we learn from the best that are out there. And that includes some additional support from me personally, as a director with quite a challenge at the moment, and to make sure that my new team have got the right coaching and mentoring support, and that we look to local authorities that have really pushed hard on practice, so that and see what worked for them, and how can we bring that here. So yeah, I've been really clear all along, is I don't believe yet we've got the full capacity, and we're absolutely welcoming support from other local authority areas and from government.
Several hands up responses to those points. Councillor Harvey, then the Chief Executive, and then come back to you.
Yeah, I'd just like to support and reinforce those points from the director. Certainly on the cabinet side of things, we just don't want to walk this journey or run this journey. If we can find roller skates that are going to get us there quicker, and if we can strap rockets to those roller skates and get there quickly and safely, then that's what we want to do. Because the longer that we are not performing for our young people, then the longer young people in the county have got a less than good service supporting them and their families. So we're really open to the advice on how we do this, safely, realistically, but as the director said, we need help from others to get there. We've got help now in assessing where we are and what we need to do next. And we may well need help to go on that journey.
Great, thank you. Provision by Cabinet of the resources and capacity for you to be able to do is pretty important. So that reassurance, Councillor, is really good. Thank you. Councillor Chalmers, did you have to add into that? I know the Chief Executive wanted to say something, but you're part of the Cabinet, so.
Yes, no, I've been really, it's very refreshing to hear the 2 questions from our colleagues over there. It's really helpful, and I share their allergy to councillors speak or officers speak, sorry, no offence to officers, but council speak. And I think it's very noticeable in the Ofsted judgment and in how our Commissioner herself speaks, that it is about impact, and it's about the experience of people who work for us, the experience of people who work with us. And so it is that it's real life language. And I agree that the diagnostic phase went on far longer than any of us would have wanted. And a change, 3 things that I do think really are different now are the openness that I think we have seen. The fact that we have been proactive about saying, yes, we need help from these people, all the help we can get, we want, and we've gone out proactively for. And also the level of ambition, which we've just heard, that's real as well. As far as the capacity and capability is concerned, obviously we're going to be working flat out between now and December, but that decision is in the hands of the Commissioner.
Thank you. Chief Executive.
Thanks, Sharon. I think just a capacity comes in a number of forms. Yes, there's additional resources and additional officers, and yes, we're working hard to get to bring that forward, and with the support of Cabinet, the funding's in place to support and deliver that. But I think equally we are, it's been mentioned, absolutely determined to make sure we get the additional capacity and support from the LGA, from the Department for Education, and from the wider local government family. And one of the things that we've all, myself, Darryl, Councillor Harvey, Councillor Toynbee, is invested in relationships with our colleagues, and important that we do take time to invest in relationships both with other local authorities who can provide mentorship and support for both local authorities and the Cabinet member and the leader of the council in the roles that they have. Working with Cabinet members and leaders who've been from inadequate to good, and what does that look and feel like as you go week by week, month by month after an inspection and a judgment. But similarly, that local government family's opened up to me in terms of those chief executives who've been from inadequate to good. So I've spoken to a number of them and working closely with a small group to understand what they're learning and what their advice is as you go through each phase. And all that can only be a good thing. So capacity comes in a number of forms. And it also comes in addition to resources and learning from others. It's about the conversations that we're having today, keeping us as officers sharp through the questions that you have, but then learning from those questions and some of the comments that have been made as to how we continue to develop and improve just through having a conversation, asking those direct questions, doing all of that as we are doing today. So capacity comes in a number of forms, and I think it's important to think about that.
Thank you. Well, we found the LGA to be very helpful in helping us to be more effective. It's good news that we're engaging with them. We're very conscious as a scrutiny committee, we're holding the Cabinet to account for delivering on the resources to the capacity and the officers to actually deliver against it. So we're very clear that distinction in our responsibility. Comprehensive answers. Thank you. Before we move on to the next topic, you wanted to add a point, did you, Fiona?
Yes, because I've heard, to quote from Mr. Freeman, he said, "We are being open and honest." I think you used the word openness, Councillor Toynbee. Because I'm not a councillor, I have to put in public questions. I put in a public question for this meeting, and the information which hasn't been given to me, ironically, is for Herefordshire, information for other areas, different types of areas, has been given. And when I go and try and query, there doesn't seem to be any comeback on officers when they don't answer questions, right? And when they give misleading information, and when I try and correct something which I thought was a contradiction to the facts, I wasn't allowed to do it. I'll tell you how it was misleading. Apart from the fact an omission can be misleading, because I specifically asked, are there any family group conferences? And by the way, Ofsted said that there are cases in pre-proceedings and proceedings which shouldn't be in there. And I suggest that if you actually have cases in there that should be scrutinised by lawyers, etc., that they're cases that should be being looked at then. And one way to avoid that is to have family group conferences, which is actually a legal requirement. That's another example. I asked specifically how many family group conferences have been held in Herefordshire and haven't been given an answer. So I'd like questions to be answered fully. I'd like them to be answered misleading. Why I say misleading is I specifically mentioned Leeds City Council, because by using family group conferences and respecting the family, basically working with the family rather than having things done to the family, they have moved from an outstanding, from a struggling local authority to an outstanding, right? And why it was misleading, because when there was a reply, although I didn't actually ask it, they said Leeds had family group conferences. Well, they still have family group conferences, and they were inspected in March of this year, and they are an outstanding thing. And it is actually a legal requirement virtually to have a family group conferences. So what I want is and also those questions which are supplementary are supposed to be answered within 2 weeks. I don't particularly care about that. But it was a straightforward. Basically, what I wanted to know was what's the average length of stay in Herefordshire. This was on a separate question, right? And I went and put this up, and I understand that is basically 2 weeks. It should be replied to, and I'd rather be getting the full and honest answer rather than being too concerned. But there was, I've got it here somewhere.
Fiona, can I just ask, you've got a really good point to make.
Yeah.
And you haven't been answered that question fully. I'm going to ask the DCS and Chief Executive to very briefly reply. But as chair,
anyway, it was basically it was about 10 weeks rather than
indeed,
10 working days before I got a reply.
We can't endorse all that detail now. You have a very good point.
Yeah, so the point is
undertaking as chair and deputy chair to work with the officers to get those answers to you as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so what I want is I want full answers to questions, honest answers, and with a reasonable time period, which is what you should actually do. And it's difficult to scrutinise when it's just you ask the question and you don't get straight answers back.
Make sure you get that information.
Yeah, and further.
Would you like to make any quick comment, either of you, Chief Executive? Yes. Thank you.
So,
I'm sorry if I got angry, but there are families who are suffering because of the actions or inactions.
So I am sorry if you felt that we misled you in any of the information we provided to the questions that you've answered and that others have. And I'm sorry if we haven't always hit the timescale as well. And I will happily look into that and make sure that we answer any unaddressed questions that you have recently asked. I think we had a conversation recently. I don't know whether it was Scrutiny or one of the other council. You and I both agreed that family group conferencing is a good model, and I'm absolutely agree with you that Leeds is an exemplary local authority. And I don't think in the wording of our response we certainly had intended to imply that they used to have and no longer have.
Well, I would say that a word has.
So again, I apologise if the clumsy use of a word may have. But Leeds is one of the local authorities that we are looking to in terms of an example of excellent practice and capacity going forward. And I will work with colleagues to make sure that if there are any outstanding responses to your questions, we provide those in a timely way.
Well, yes, and to actually answer them at the first go.
We'll give you a commitment to do that. If you want to add anything, Councillor Tom.
Just on the family group conferences, I think we all do agree that they're a model. I've looked at a lot of what they do in Leeds. I think we all agree that they're a model that we'd like to follow, and we've had conversations outside these meetings about it. Unfortunately, it's not something that we can say, let's just do it and let's start next week. There are certain foundations that we need to have in place before we do, because if we do bring it in, we need to do it properly. But I think we all agree that that's what we want to do.
Great, thank you. We've had a hard testing time with some really good searching questions and some reassuring answers. I know time's moving on, but I think we could do with a 5-minute break. Does everybody agree?
Well, I was just going to mention mental capacity without tea and a biscuit.
Yes. So shall we?
I can confirm, Chairman, that we're live streaming.
Thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. Going back on to key areas 7, voice of children and families. Then you would like to ask a question. Participation side.
Yeah, so Scrutiny Chair and Vice Chair had a very good briefing from Christine Robertson, who had prepared a participation strategy. And it covers lots of the areas that we've already talked about. And then, for one reason or another, we didn't know where it had gone. And lo and behold, in conversation with our officer here, Mr. Bullingham. The participation strategy rests with him. And I think I'm right in saying that it probably will pick up things like family forum and this, that and the other, but instead of actually having, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to have a family group forum, or we're going to have a this, or we're going to have a that. What I'd like to see is, I think Scrutiny would like to see a participation strategy, and you know, I'm pretty sure that it's a very good strategy, and I'd like to see it as soon as possible in order that we can support you in asking for the financial resource that you'll need in order to deliver it. So will you give us a bit of an outline of it here today, and what you need in order to deliver it, please?
Thanks for the question. So you're right in reflecting that the participation strategy and a need around participation has been identified, and so we do have a set of proposals that will enhance a range of opportunities to increase participation by children and families, and young people and others. And so some work is already underway in that regard. We have a participation officer in the service already. There's a range of events, actions and opportunities for children, young people and their families to contribute currently. However, we really want to make an informed commitment and a range of additional opportunities for those children and families. And so we're looking to build a dedicated participation team that will have a direct relationship with the principal social worker, and that will also link in with the quality assurance part service, so that we can feed back information to our operational practitioners to enhance the relationship, so that it becomes more of a partnering sort of feel, so that there's a range of dedicated interventions, actions and outcomes. And so we have, so for example, we've already commenced the process to build a dedicated website for children and young people to gather their voice. And so the next step for us really is to look at some additional resource, which we're looking for within our service. There may be a gap in that, but that's something that as a leadership team we'll need to consider, so that we can recruit to some dedicated roles to enhance that work. And with that operational work sitting alongside the social work academy, alongside the principal social worker, we feel as that will give a stronger voice to the feedback from young people, and also will give greater structure to the work that we're doing. So you'll see it with greater clarity, but also there'll be an increased level of brand around it. So there'll be if you think about the value of the voice of young people and children and families across Herefordshire, that there will be a space for them that's dedicated, so that it'll shine through rather than something we have to reach for and look for. It'll have more of a presence. So that's the aspiration. I'll be happy to present updates to Scrutiny and in other places going forward on that work.
So yeah, thank you very much. And I'm aware that some of what you're saying seems to overlap with one of the issues, I think, which was Sam Pratley was highlighting earlier, which is around creative procurement. So, you know, if you're having a participation strategy with a team of people, there are already people on the front line working with children, teachers particularly, who are very present in the room, who participate with families and children on a daily basis. And, you know, there's a possibility that in that cohort of individuals is someone who is working, you know, maybe a half-time schedule, who could actually be pulled into teamwork with yourself. So I'm keen to see whether there is some creative procurement going on around this area. So
yes, it's something we're looking at widely. So there's a number of organisations out there that very ably represent service users, whether they be families, parents and other children, that we probably don't have good enough and strong enough relationships at the minute. So we're doing some work there to create forums that we can do that. We regularly hear from head teachers and other staff in our schools and colleges that they will be a good conduit for some of that information, because they're spending every day of the school week with children and young people. And again, we don't we haven't historically had a good enough kind of link with some of that. So we're doing some work, planning to do some work with Schools Forum and the SENCO leads and safeguarding leads, think about how can we capture some of that in different ways. There's also a range of surveys like the wellbeing surveys that we do in schools and that we've done in the past with our Looked After Children group, that again we don't routinely as a council collate all of that data. So there's a lot of engagement activity going on already in all of things, but we don't routinely bring that together. So we're looking at how can we make better uses of the resources that are out there at the minute. How might we commission some specific questions, if you like, or pieces of work in school settings and in colleges and in early years settings and other stuff. How can we do the listening to families work? And then also we've got across the council some individual kind of isolated posts. So for example, within SEND, there's a participation post. We've got another one within the schools improvement service. We've got another one that works with Your Voice Matters, the care leavers group. So it's about how do we bring that together so that it's a coherent and joined up service. So that in fact it's everybody working with one common aim around listening genuinely to children and people and families. And some of the work that Councillor Toynbee's leading with us at the minute and championing with the members that are on the corporate parenting board is how do we kind of re-establish a really representative and vibrant children care council. So we've got Your Voice Matters do a really good and powerful job. They have a voice and they make sure that we hear them, but they're kind of representative of a slightly older, by and large, of a slightly older care leaver group. So the work that Julie Meffam is doing at the minute, she's the head of service for corporate parenting, is working with that group and other corporate parenting board members to kind of recommission and be creative, as you're describing, how that will work in the future. Not reinventing the wheel. Again, some really good examples about that. And also there was some really good work that went on in Herefordshire in the past, probably pre-COVID to a certain degree. Lots of things seem to have fallen by the wayside slightly during the COVID period that just need a bit of energy and a push, and recognising the good work that some people do.
Yeah, so just to come back in a related area, one of the things that I have been really saddened by is that children's life histories haven't been successfully represented in social work documentation, or they haven't been referred to, or they haven't been developmentally updated as the child goes on and tells another story. And I did, and I think she's gone now with Denver, but I did flag to her the work of Richard Rose, child psychotherapist, who did a lot of work with children's histories. Now, it may seem that sort of this is about the child's voice, and we've been calling for it for a long time, but it's really important because the IROs are going to come back to us, hopefully quite soon, I think in the new year, with their report, and we really want to see evidence that they have been able to reflect the voice of the child and bring it to us, because it's been an absolute desert in Scrutiny. Sorry, it gets me very emotional, this, because I think it's incredibly important. I don't want the children in, but I want us to find a way of gathering that voice. And the challenge, please, to the Directorate is that in our next meeting, we want it in this room in some way, please.
Well, I would add, it's a challenge to the Cabinet as well, because genuinely, I totally endorse what Jenny's saying. One of the things we feel at Scrutiny we are particularly poor at doing is listening to families and the public, and the response to the common bond that's been set up and how many people join that shows very clearly that whatever we think, the public out there don't believe we've been listening to them adequately. So it's a good question to ask, reassuring you feel about the additional resources, very reassuring with Darryl about setting up the Children's Care Council. We do need to genuinely deliver on that, and it's good to get the reassurance that you recognise that and that you're delivering. I don't know if you want to try anything else for the public view, particularly, Diana, but I think it'd be good for you to say something as a Cabinet member on the same subject, please.
Yeah, no, I agree, and engagement and participation is one of my priorities, and when I came into this role I was a bit surprised by how underdeveloped it was, should we say. So it's really good that we've got a participation team now. I completely agree that we need better online presence, user-friendly branding and all that kind of thing. I have frequent conversations with families, and we all need to be listened to. We all need our stories heard. And also from the perspective of my role, it's not enough to listen. I want to make sure that we use what we learn from those conversations and incorporate them into how we improve. So there's how we capture the voice of the child in the frontline work. There's how we engage with families in an ongoing way, a meaningful way, to improve our services. And then there's also how we engage with people specifically on the Ofsted improvement plan. So they're sort of separate things. But on the second thing, as you were saying about creative commissioning, I think there are possibilities of finding quite specific skills to make these sort of things meaningful. And it's quite complex and sensitive, isn't it? That, people tell their stories. We don't know how representative people are. There are lots of people who are very difficult, hard to reach, as they say. How can things be representative? And what does it actually mean to incorporate feedback, both positive and less positive, into how we design and deliver our services? And I think there is potential for finding people with quite specific skills in the community who can facilitate that for us. So I'm exploring that.
Right.
Just a quick comeback. The drive to say what's poor always seems to be stronger. And it would be really nice to see the directorate inviting the drive to say what's good, who has actually had an experience with their social worker in Herefordshire and could report it, because it would uplift the team, and I think it would be really quite useful.
Thank you. You had your hand up, Councillor Andrews.
Hang on. Yes, I did. I think I'm joining in at the right time here. It's one of the things I've often asked is that how we do a customer service survey for what the council offers. And I think this is a great opportunity, as almost like restructuring a directorate, is how does a customer service provide that in this directorate? So do we go and ask people what they want? How we are measuring ourselves of abilities to supply the customer, which are the general public, with what they want and also what they can legally have. And I think that's something that I would like to see built into both the project of what we're doing for the Ofsted report to supply it, but also to see how that can be built into a performance rating, as you know I like them, of how a performance rating of customer service can be brought in as a standard reply. So you can reply to a letter, as Fiona correctly said, that she gets a reply within 14 days. A person is seen within 4 days, whatever those sort of constituents are that measure a performance against a customer service. Can we do that? Is it something, for example, Leeds Council do and they do really well, or is it something Hereford can badge themselves and say that we delivered that first and we're going to deliver it? So I'd be interested to hear what both the Cabinet and the Directorate think about that, please.
Yes, Darryl. First of all, you'd have to respond.
So the answer to the question, Councillor Andrews, is no, we don't routinely do that, and we don't consistently do that, and there's not a framework for all of that. So some of the things we do, we absolutely have to measure and respond to in terms of statutory timelines or government statutory timelines or local council. And as Ms. Reid pointed out, we don't always get that right. And then there's other things, which is the kind of almost softer, but the customer relationship stuff which you're talking about, which I think is really important in terms of people feeling like when they've rang the service or emailed the service, they get a response within a certain timescale and feel like it's just that importance of feeling heard or acknowledged, even if sometimes we can't agree necessarily on the outcome, but it's just at least the process of having had a response and feeling like somebody's listening to. That's something we're talking about at the minute and thinking about that in terms of our admin support processes and also how we can so when we, for example, when we finish a piece of support with a family and perhaps close our intervention down with the families is inviting them to feedback and comment either face to face or through some kind of form on what was the experience like. Just almost 4 or 5 questions, because most people don't want to do pages and pages of anything. But just to get some your customer service ratings that you see on so many other businesses and sites and organisations and things. So that is something that we're looking at. It's not something as a service, and possibly even as a council, we've routinely done well in the past, but it's certainly something we're looking at now.
Okay, Darryl. I don't know whether either you cabinet members wanted to add anything to that. I think that's a good response. Phil, and it's part of your area. Is there anything you would like to add? Chief Executive, you're happy with both. Hopefully answer your question satisfactorily, Graham. Yeah, okay, thank you. Fiona, I know you want to ask a question on family involvement.
Yes.
I know you, sorry, yes, Councillor, I didn't know down here, so I'm just going to say, I know you had your hands up, sorry.
And thank you. It's just when it goes too far along, you forget what you would.
Yes, right.
Yeah, but I just wanted to commend that we got the participation officer for Your Voice Matters, does fantastic work, and she's really good. And I have to say that the Your Voice Matters, they probably could have written the Ofsted report, the children, from there, from a lot of the comments that I've had from them in the past. But what is emerging from this, I think, is that we need to work together with the community so much more, and it's everybody in it together, and prevention better than cure, and with getting the families, and that's where we should be. That's where we should be going. And I just wanted to go back really quickly to the exchange that we had before the tea break. Now, it was interesting because there was a question from a member of the public, technically, and then different from members of the council. If it had been a question from a member of the council, would it have been answered in exactly the same way?
That's your question.
That's my question.
I know you addressed that question too. Well, maybe
the people who I will.
Let's ask the DCS to comment on it. Thank you.
So thank you for your feedback about the participation officer. I'll make sure that gets back to her. In honesty, I don't think that it would. Sometimes the nature of some of the questions we're asked is also highlighting some of the challenges we have in getting accurate data and or some of the data performance we're going. So I think notwithstanding Ms. Reid's own personal experience and frustration at the way that we've not been able to answer some of her questions to her satisfaction, I don't believe the fact that she's not a member is an issue.
Thank you. I wasn't so personal, it was just
fine, Ellen. We understand it's been answered fine. Thank you. Fiona, I know you want to come back to you. The question on family involvement. We looked at the children, but family involvement, which is a slightly different aspect of it.
Well, I'll ask her. Please, can you explain how you ensure that the perspectives of children, young people, and families are heard in the development and implementation improvement measures, and continue to be heard in the ongoing delivery of services, and that the service remains responsive to the perspectives of people who are at the receiving end of social care services? And that was what I was going to ask, but I think you covered it in respect of children and young people, but I don't think you covered it regarding families. And by families, I don't mean the general public. I mean people who have got direct involvement with children's services. That could be because they've got a child in need, or it could be because they've got their child in care. So I think there should be something perhaps more formal than listening to the families. So how can families be involved, and perhaps by when, and how much would be needed to be invested to achieve this?
Thank you.
So thank you for the question. So I think our self-evaluation and the Ofsted report tell us that we're not very good at that at the minute, and haven't been good at that for some time. So we know this is an area where we need to make significant improvement. The kind of how families there are a number of ways that families currently do contribute. So families are involved in the assessments and plans and reviews, whether you're a child in need, child protection and looked after child. But I readily accept that some families, for a variety of reasons, struggle to engage with us in that way, either because they feel that they aren't being heard, or because in fact, when you sat in a room with professionals, that can be really hard to have a conversation and to engage. Some families, for example, will write to the chief exec or myself, and we do meet a number of those families and meet directly with them and have conversations. I suspect we will both continue to do that, although we hope that in fact less and less over time. It's because people feel that they have to come to either Paul or myself, and that in fact they can just speak to their social worker or their team manager and be heard and listened to, and issues resolved. We're working at the minute through the engagement and participation strategy, which isn't just about children, it's about how do we engage with families and parents. So we're strengthening our relationship, for example, with Parent Carer Voice, which is primarily around children with special educational needs and disability, and through the Listening to Families Forum. As kind of linked to the question that Councillor Andrew asked a minute as well, we're looking at that, how do we have a constant feedback loop with families? So there are a number of ways that we do that, and we need to do more of that, and we need to do it better. In terms of, I think, where I can't give you the assurance at the minute is all of that activity, and there's quite a lot of activity going on. It doesn't necessarily kind of, how do we demonstrate that all of those conversations that are happening you come back round and improve the service? So I think that's the bit where we need to do more work, and very happy to work with Scrutiny members and in terms of thinking about the forward plan and maybe future task and finish activities, in terms of how can we build on the networks that you as members of this Scrutiny have also got, to make sure that we're having that feedback loop, if you like, that constant dialogue with service users.
Yeah, so you haven't got any intention to actually set up a formal structure for people whose children are in care, or is my interpretation correct? There won't be any sort of formal feedback from people who are being supported by social workers.
No, that's not what I said. And what I did say was that through the development of our engagement and participation strategy, we're looking at developing a forum for engaging with parents and families, as well as, and of course, as the Director of Children's Services, a lot of the work that I do isn't necessarily directly with families, but we do that through so for example, children in care, a lot of that work is through the independent reviewing officers and the like. So I haven't ruled out the establishment of any formal groups going forward. We also need to make sure we're listening to families to determine what will work for them.
Yes, so there won't be any.
Yeah, and I know that Councillor Harvey wanted to respond to your initial point as well. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, your question has sort of raised a query for me that is particularly relating to families whose cases are live in terms of them being handled by social workers, who may, as the chairman has suggested, find it particularly difficult to raise concerns about how they feel they are being treated or their cases are being handled, because the future of their families and their children are in the hands and the judgment of the professionals that they may be concerned to be implicitly criticising. But I guess I want to ask a question: is there an advocacy route for those parents, or the IRO process by which they can safely raise concerns and have those concerns considered without worrying that they are in some way jeopardising the assessment of their family cases? Question.
it's a good one which we can work with in how we develop whatever it might be called, some sort of forum, whatever, then I think consulting with the people concerned themselves to give us their feedback and how they feel they can do that would be part of that process.
Well, I'm not so much talking about the scrutiny committee being involved in this. It's more a case of there being a safe route rather than waiting until the outcome of their cases has been determined one way or the other and then being dissatisfied and upset about things that happened while things are happening. If there is an opportunity to address concerns that are live while the cases are being handled by us. I'm just asking, is there a way in which that can happen at the moment? And if there isn't, can we consider whether it's feasible to do that without derailing the process that everybody's going through?
Yeah, I think I totally understood you meant the family's not scrutiny, but we may have a role in helping to come up with some way in which that can be done and scrutinising whether the people we're delivering it to feel it is actually offering that safe route to provide the sort of advocacy that you're suggesting they might need. I think that's something to work on with you and help and advise, but obviously something for you to develop, I suggest.
Yeah, so our advocacy service, Herefordshire Council at the minute is very weak. It's a very limited resource. It's spot purchased, and that's one of the things that Phil's tasked with as part of his thinking and development of our engagement and participation strategy is to grow and develop that resource. That will have a resource implication, so we will need to bring that back to the relevant groups and bodies for that. But it's, you know, we recognise there's a need and demand for a much different and better resource advocacy service going forward.
Thank you. Councillor, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just thank you, Councillor Harvey, because I have come across this and, you know, one of the reflections that I had listening to the fact that, you know, so the Chief Executive and the DCS are both involved with some families, you know, that as a result of advocacy and possibly also mediation, that as our social work practice improves, both those skills, advocacy and mediation, sit within good social work practice. So the need for it should gradually reduce. So I'm really keen to do that because I've met that with some families because the stress that they're under means that they don't always regulate as carefully as they could in that situation, and to have an advocate would probably avoid them getting into further, you know, situations where their children need to be looked after by somebody else.
Was there a question or were you just making that?
No, I just wanted to say it because it's really important.
Okay, great. Let's move on to item 18, quality of practice. A quick question on this, because I think the public would expect us to ask the question, because the quotation from the report was that the quality of practice, including assessment plans, planning, purposeful visits that are responsive to risk and need. That comes back to a question of staff. So the question we wanted to ask was, what percentage of frontline social workers have received additional training to refresh and update their skills? How much of this training was online and self-assessed? And what changes and improvements in that training do you think needs to be provided in order to make sure we are delivering and being responsive to inputs from our families and children? Because at the moment there seems to be a bit of a misgap at times. Maybe that might be a question for the answer.
Well, we'll do it like this a bit. So we don't have the data bit of the question here there in terms of I'd have to go away and we'd have to trawl quite a lot of. So what we don't have currently, and it's in our improvement plan because it's something we're working on corporately, is a really good learning and development profile that enables us. So linked to the My Conversation or the appraisal type conversations that we have across the council that we launched earlier this year, and the increased supervision that we're seeing in children's services, and the increased management oversight, and the development of a more extended learning and development officer, which we talked about earlier on being more face-to-face than e-learning now than it used to be. So what I can't say is this is the data and this is in terms of the direct answer to your question. That's something that's a work in progress for us at the moment.
Okay, it's obviously an important area. I think it's important we address it so the public know that we know it's being addressed and it's important area.
It absolutely is, and the quality of practice. So we this year did quite a lot of work again looking at the best practice in the best in class, if you like, local authorities out there, and our workforce, and the DFE and sector-led improvement partners to look at our practice standards here. We've revised and refreshed our quality assurance framework, so that how do we know question always. We've got a number of practice leads who are doing work with frontline managers and frontline workers that kind of bring the learning from our quality assurance activities. So again, we're kind of closing the loop and seeking to improve the practice. And again, it kind of, there's almost, I referred to my answer earlier on, really, we've touched on some of the elements of this in the other questions.
Great, thank you. Anything anybody wants to add? Would you want to add into that?
Just to second Daryl's comments, really, the practice development work is live and active as we sit here now. So and it's in-person activity. So it's picking up on key priorities, particularly around safeguarding and engaging practitioners in direct workshops here in Plough Lane, and coaching and guiding and supporting them around key practice standards. And so it's very live. But it's also our partners are contributing into this space as well, because they've got a lot to say around what good looks like when you think about health assessments for children, when you think about joint work with police colleagues. So there is a range of multi-agency training that we need to enhance and attend, and also to align the training, learning development profiles of our academy as well as the partnership. So all of this stuff is a busy space and quite a positive space as well. So
great, thank you very much. Just two more key areas I want you to explore: management and workforce. So if you look at management first, I know Councillor Jones, you had a question to ask on culture.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what concerns me, and it's highlighted in the Ofsted report, and it's very critical of management at management through on children's services and at the senior level. And just to quote some of the headlines, lack of consistent management, irregular and often weak supervision, a lack of structure, senior managers' visibility is poor, senior manager line of sight is not sufficiently robust, and historical lack of stable and capable team of senior managers. To me, that highlights what we've talked about before, but it highlights a management team that hasn't been listening in the past, and I think that's a part of this culture that we're trying to change. Can you assure us or give us any examples of how that is being turned around and addressed?
I believe so. I think I know that if you walk the second floor today, yesterday, tomorrow, any day this week, you'll find myself or service directors and heads of service and then service managers there and on the floor. It doesn't matter whether we live in Herefordshire or not, or indeed what the type of contract we've got, but you'll see many more and many more visible managers here than certainly was the case at the beginning of this year and a year or so ago. And we've kind of acknowledged, or I've acknowledged in these meetings in the past, that that wasn't the case before. I'm not commenting on people that can before me or anything else, but that's one of the things that I have personally championed in my time here is that inappropriate behaviour, inappropriate language is not acceptable here and will be called out and has been. And that's something that Paul's passionate about too, across the whole of the council. So we have had many, and will continue to have many difficult but open and honest conversations with our workforce, both in children's services and across the council and with some of our partner agencies, as well as we're doing with families as well at the minute. And the fact that they're difficult conversations doesn't mean we're going to stop doing them at all, or that we're going to avoid them. And there are many more examples of that. And I think if you speak to the majority of our workforce, and there are many more of them in the building now as well. Now we've got flexible futures and changed the layout and opened up the building in a different way. I'm pretty confident that they will say to you that this is an approachable and visible leadership team. I think both Paul and I can use a number of examples where people stop off at our offices or stop us as we're walking around the building and say, have you got a minute? in a way that probably wasn't the case. I know wasn't the case when I first got here, because some people have reported that historically they felt they couldn't, and that the response they would get wouldn't be a positive one. So I think the assurance, whilst I can say lots of things, I would invite members to speak to the workforce and walk the floor occasionally, and go and join in some team meetings and the like, which I think is a valid activity for a scrutiny committee.
Any other comment?
Thank you.
No. I think culture is a leadership issue. I don't know whether you want to add anything to it, Chief Executive, about comment on culture change and managing that.
I think it goes to what I was saying before about my role as Chief Executive, championing improvement in children's services, not just in terms of collective responsibility of our partners, but across the organisation as a whole. And how do we involve everyone in that? And it is, some of this isn't rocket science. It is about taking time for people, in terms of asking how people are, yes, but also letting people know that it is easy to get in touch and have a conversation, and that visible leadership is the kind of values that we practice, and behaviours are about listening to people. And we see the value of that in terms of, and the impact of that, where people, as I call it, cut through the layers, and they want to talk to me as the Chief Executive, and as a team, we recognise that's how we are, and we would encourage that. So things like cutting through the layers and letting people have a conversation and sharing with the Chief Executive their thoughts is part of how we are. People respond to that, as is, going out to see people in their place of work, and listening to their needs and concerns. Are the messages getting through? Not always, they get blocked. What we're doing about that. So there is lots of things for us to do, but we are certainly practicing an open and visible leadership style, and that I want that to become effective in the nicest possible way. In that's the type of organisation I want us to be.
I think we reinforce that. My studies of culture, you don't change culture by changing people, you change culture by changing practices. And I think we're illustrating that that's a key area we know we need to address. A lot of these activities are about doing just that. Before we move on, it's got to 5 o'clock, where technically we come to the end of our 3 hours. But just so everybody knows, I have been around the room and everybody agrees that, given this is such an important and critical area to investigate and scrutinise, that we're all happy to carry on up to 5:30 if necessary, just so that everybody knows and recognises that's the case. Everybody's happy with that? Agreed? Thank you. Fiona, you were going to...
Can I just make the point that it might be an idea if you actually do have an independent staff survey, because how do you actually know what the staff are really thinking? And and I think that's, because also I think you should revamp your complaints procedure, because there's so many complaints. It's obviously it only registered 19 complaints within 6 months. Well, that doesn't look realistic to me. So, would you like to have an independent staff survey?
So perhaps I can, perhaps a double act. So my microphone's died. Hopefully you can still hear me. Thank you. The programmes end at 5 o'clock, aren't they? So we've currently got an independent organisation in at the recommendation of the Children's Commissioner and as part of our transformation plan, and they're in the middle of a series of engagement activities with our workforce. So not involving me, not involving senior managers, but not involving managers, and where our workforce are being invited to go and meet with this organisation to explore what it's like working here, what are the barriers to progress and improvement, and they will be feeding back to Paul and myself and others and feeding into that. But I think you raise a really valid point, and that's something we should give consideration to. We've recently done a council-wide staff survey, which is certainly independent of me and my line management, if you like. That was done by our HR and organisation development. The findings of that are just being disseminated literally this week across the organisation. So that'll be a useful triangulation point. There's been some really frank and honest feedback in that mechanism as well. So we're certainly not relying just on what the team managers or supervisors tell us, but the value of independence, I think, is important. Noted.
That sounds great. And on the topic of input from families, I noticed that there isn't any input at all, any representative of families on the improvement board. So that might be perhaps something to consider. You know, I think they thought of everyone bar the families.
Point noted. Question to ask for the future. Something you're nodding there, Paul. That being something considered.
We need to find a place in our governance arrangement for how we best do that.
Yes, we do.
And I'm not sure whether that's the improvement.
I think I agree with that. The question's a good one, and the thought is a good one, but I agree. I'm not sure the improvement board per se is the best place for that to be taken on. Okay, thank you. Right, I'm going to move on to the last item. There were 12 on this, just so people know, but Human Rights Act and Scrutiny, I think we pretty well covered those. The last key area that we really need to explore is workforce, probably the most important. So last but certainly not least. I know we had a number of questions there. Tony, I know you wanted to ask something on workforce.
Yeah, I think possibly from what I hear, one of the real benefits of the ECHO team is that they've been able to build relationships, and it seems to me that building relationships is absolutely crucial to the workforce. So obviously we understand the issues with agency staffing, and what I'm not entirely clear on is actually, you know, what proportion of our staff are agency staff, what proportion are actually full-time Herefordshire Council staff. I'd also quite like to know, you probably won't be able to answer this now, but it would be good to know sort of how many staff, Herefordshire Council staff, are actually off on long-term sick. How are they being supported back into the jobs? And also that there is colloquial evidence that there are staff who are under investigation for a particular reason, and that those investigations have taken quite a long time, and those staff are unable to work during that time as well. So it would be good to sort of get a handle on the staff that Herefordshire Council actually have. How are they being supported? If they're off work, how are they being supported back into work? You know, one of the key aspects of the report was about the sufficiency and stability of staff across the workforce, including sufficient numbers of foster carers, so that children receive a timely response to having their needs identified and met across the service. So, you know, what assurances can you provide that improved sufficiency and stability of staff across the workforce is being put into place?
A number of issues there. So, as you would expect, I'm not going to comment on individual cases at all. But so I'll work backwards from sufficiency if I can, and then try and answer each of the points that you've raised there. Recruitment and retention, or retention and recruitment, is probably our single greatest enabling factor here, or barrier. It's either an enabler or a barrier at different points in this improvement journey. So I don't have the exact numbers at the top of my head right now, but certainly when I met with the head of HR a couple of weeks ago, about I think it was 49% of our established workforce was locum at the minute, and the rest permanent. So it's about a 50-50 split. And then there's a group of additional teams that we've added in the last year who by their nature are locum. So that's when it's, if you merge the two together, it's a different number altogether. But you know, if on the budget I've got 100 workers, then about 50 of them are permanent and 50 of them are interim. So that's a challenge for us. So I wouldn't want anybody watching this broadcast or in this room to think that interim or locum equals bad. We've got some really good interims and locums who bring huge amount of experience and a breadth of knowledge from other good and outstanding local authorities. But Ofsted were quite right that there's a vulnerability for us when you've got that proportion of interim workforce, because that workforce can go somewhere else potentially at different points. It's also more expensive for us as a local authority, And ultimately, it's not good for families if a family is experiencing multiple changes in social work over a year or two. It is far better for us, and it will speed up our improvement activity if over time the proportion of our workforce that is permanent increases and the proportion of our workforce that is interim decreases, because it will lead to a more stable workforce. It will lead to improved relationships with families. It will lead to improved relationships between workers and their supervisors, because again, there's change and churn there. So nationally, there is a shortage of experienced social workers, and for many years now, this local authority has struggled to recruit, partly because of geography and a whole load of other reasons. And of course, the fact that we're an inadequate local authority now hasn't helped at all. So it gets more difficult. So corporately, as part of that whole council approach, we're looking at retention and recruitment of social workers in terms of our offer, our benefits, our packages, the training, the levels of supervision. So we've seen caseloads come down dramatically over the last year. We've seen supervision increasing. When you look at research evidence of what makes people stay with their employer in local government, it's generally the manager you've got, and whether you get good quality supervision. It's often less about paying conditions, but nonetheless, we need to be competitive in a highly competitive market. So that's something we're very focused on at the minute. And I mentioned in an earlier question that we are, for example, building a microsite and completely changing our recruitment processes, so that when somebody expresses an interest in working for us, we get them into an interview really quickly, rather than wait for 3 weeks and 4 weeks and lose them to somebody else and stuff like that. So there's a whole load of work going on there. Foster carers, we have some amazing foster carers in Herefordshire. We should be really proud of them. I'd like us to hopefully have some time in the Scrutiny work programme over the next year to celebrate the work of some of our foster carers and the work that they do. 70% of the children in our care are in family homes, which means a foster type placement. Not all of them are with our own foster carers. We do not have enough foster carers, and Ofsted were rightly pointing that out. So a fostering service generally has to kind of run to stand still. So over a year, foster carers retire, possibly are unwell, or might enter permanent relationships like special guardianship orders and the like with children. So you lose some of your beds and homes over the year. So in order just to keep a number throughout the year, you have to work damn hard to recruit foster carers. And foster carers generally don't do it for the money. So it's a passion and a labour of love. So we've got we've got an engagement officer for our fostering service. We're putting additional support. We've restructured that team completely in the way that it supports foster carers. But we have got to do something really quite different over the next 12 to 18 months to make sure we recruit many more foster carers. And again, I think that's somewhere where Scrutiny can, answering your question earlier on, in terms of recommendations, how do we promote Herefordshire Council as a service that is foster friendly in terms of our own employees and our own counsellors, for example? How do we support them to be fostering friendly? And how do we grow the number of foster carers in the service? Our levels of sickness as a children's service actually aren't that high, which is a surprise. It's a question I often ask because it's quite a stressful and demanding role, depending on where you are in the organisation at different points. But in fact, our levels of sickness are not significantly high compared to other parts of the council, and we have fewer than a handful of colleagues who are on what you describe as long-term sickness absence. And I won't comment anymore on that because I wouldn't want to get into identifying people. But where a colleague is absent through illness, is they will have a nominated manager and HR contact to make sure we support and stay in touch throughout their absence. And then, for example, the colleague who's recently returned from long-term absence, we make sure there's a phased return and make sure we bring the right support in place so that we don't get a recurrence of what may have been absent for in the past. Again, where a colleague is in formal performance management procedures, there's a really clear process for that, which applies across the whole of the council. And it's quite right that we follow that process rigidly and fairly, so that a colleague has the opportunity to develop if development is needed, or to perform better or differently. but also that they're protected from poor management practice and the like, and the challenges in the past that people have said that they felt bullied. So we've got really good and robust processes and procedures, and an HR service that is very supportive and make sure that we follow those processes.
Thank you. Very full answer. Totally satisfied with that. I've got 3 more questions I know people want to ask on this area, and then I think we can close down the whole afternoon because we've done a very thorough job. I hope everyone agree on all the issues. But on this same issue, I know Victor, you want to answer a question. Sam, you raised a question to us in advance, and Graham, you also raised a question in this area on HR and flexibility to respond. So Victor first.
Thank you for that. Apologies if this is in place already, but as a scrutiny committee, and as a member of the committee, it would be very useful to know the actual figures from a starting point of how many colleagues in Herefordshire, how long they stay, and if there are improvements. I accept your point about locums. It's not that, you know, they can be invaluable in their input. But I think it's important as scrutiny committee, if Ofsted clearly identify a lack of stability as being a major factor for many of the reasons, many of the difficulties that we now face, I think it would be good, and it might be a win-win scenario, which is always helpful in management to change, to see if we can, from a particular starting point, look at how many staff stay and how long they stay, so that we can show that where the staff move on for the right reasons, promotions, etc., there is still a more stable staff for the next time Ofsted come. And I just think those figures would be very useful for this committee in that, and also, figures for in terms of long-term absence, etc., this sort of thing. They can all, obviously anonymize, nobody would be able to detect, but just the basic figures to show that there is progress in that area, given that it was so obvious in the report that that was one of the major contributors to the situation we now face.
Yeah, thank you. And so what might be of help to the committee going forward is that so there's two areas where I can think of that might help in terms of that benchmark and that measuring progress over time. So one is all local authorities participate in a national annual survey of its workforce, particularly social work workforce, that looks at caseloads, churn, so changes in social worker over time, proportion of the workforce that is permanent and locum and the like. And I think off the top of my head that the snapshot date for that is the end of October. So we'll shortly be submitting data for that. What we could do, what you could do, certainly once we've analysed that data and presented in some sort of report, is ask our HR and organisation development colleagues to present some kind of workforce profile, which we could then use as an annual benchmarking activity for schools. So, and I'm sure they'd welcome the opportunity to come in to present.
Okay, happy with that answer, Victor?
Yes, that would be an excellent start, I think.
Thank you. Good. Sam, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm obviously very young, but I think I counted at least 21 different directors of adults or children's services that I've interacted with in my time in Hereford. I'm pretty sure all of them have talked about social work capacity and have given similar-ish recruitment statements about what we will do next time about package and appeal and Hereford and all the rest of it. I am interested genuinely to know what will be different this time. But my question is more about how creative are we prepared to be with our partners? We've talked about developing partnerships to either build their capacity to enable us to prevent the need for the social workers in the first place, or to use our schools or housing associations to actually be the recruiters of the social workers. If Herefordshire Council potentially is a brand that's struggling to attract people, can we not use some of those partners to partner with more formally, to place social workers who are already working with a lot of those children already, to do things differently? Historically, lots of conversations about that have always hit procurement rules and commissioning and the capacity, the roller skates that the local community has already got to deliver. By the time the commissioning has happened, those roller skates have long since gone, the capacity's moved on. So we're not very nimble about using some of those partnerships.
If I make a start on that one, then I'm sure you'll fill in anything I missed. But I'm not sure about the 21 children's services directors. I'll take your word for that. So, I was in one of the comments that one of the elected members made on the first briefing that we had on publication of the report was, well, to be honest, Paul, there's nothing new in this report that we haven't seen in the previous 3 or 4 Ofsted reports. And I thought it was a truism that, you know, shortage of staff, issues of quality of practice, supervision were all features of the last 3 or 4 Ofsted reports. And going back to 2010, Herefordshire has struggled with recruitment and continues to recruit. And it's tried many, I'm sure it's tried many different strategies all the time. But you know, we have to sort that now. And Darren will talk more about the employment strategies and the recruitment and retention work we're doing. You know, the payments that we want to introduce for staff in terms of being an employee of Herefordshire Council alongside a positive employer offer around training and development, quality of supervision, place to live. How do we help with transport? How can we help with accommodation? What does all of that mean? So that's all part of the employer offer. But I think equally one thing that's slightly different this time, I've in my role as chief executive, one of the groups I've just set up recently, and it happens in many other counties and many other places, is a forum where the public sector leaders come together. Because all of the public sector leaders, whether it's across housing, police, fire, or our colleges and university, we've all got the same challenge around recruitment, huge vacancies across those different parts of the public sector. But we've come together as public sector leaders and agreed, you know, we're looking at what our top 5 things are that we can work together on from a Herefordshire perspective. And top of the list is about recruitment. And how do we set out what the Herefordshire brand is and what the Herefordshire story is, so that we can all collectively get behind that, and how do we better join up recruitment. Schools want to be part of that. They told us at the last improvement board they want to be part of it. The colleges want to be part of it, as does the Wye Valley Trust, because we're all looking to recruit qualified people who we want to retain and stay and invest in them. So I think that's different now than it's been before. It's early days and we're just starting to put the plans together. But you know, if we add the housing RPs into that, then you know we're broadening out that circle of influence all the time. And it's the only way we're going to do this, rather than acting as independent federal republics. And that's not going to work and never will. You know, there isn't a them and us, there's just a bigger us. I mean, the detail of recruitment, I'll leave to Darren in many respects, but I suppose it's the reality is where we are, Sam.
Yeah, I think we've answered in parts on it. So I think Paul's kind of answered what's different. I think I really feel that the whole system is buying into this at the minute. I can't speak for previous attempts, but I did say earlier on that recruitment's been a challenge here for many, many years. We have got a significant number of very committed, dedicated and loyal workers in service that have been through thick and thin, particularly over the last 2 years. And I think we need to recognise and commend them for that. They are our salespeople of the future, as are indeed other organisations. So happy to work with others to think about how we do things differently and creatively. I'm very happy to have conversations along those lines. To be a social worker, you have to have done a social work degree, which is quite different to years ago when it was a different qualification route and the like. Not all that happens in a children's service has to be done by a social worker. So when we get to a point when the quality of our practice is much improved and we're in a stronger position, frankly, then I think then we can be much more creative too about, well, Ashford, let's look at a range of people coming into the service with different skills, experience and backgrounds, because whilst a social worker has to do the assessment and kind of write the plan, a lot of the intervention can be done by people with a youth work background or family support background or an expert by experience type of background. There's a whole load of things that we can do differently. Go into that realm from a position of strength, because I'm really clear Ofsted would not countenance that from us. You need to get social work practice right first and then start thinking creatively. So we're very happy to have conversations with you and others about how we might do that and harness some existing resources.
Okay, happy with the answer to that question. Councillor Andrews, I know you had one of the questions you wanted to ask on this. Do you still feel the need to ask that question on HR and flexibility?
Yes, I would. I'll be very quick. So I think we've had a really good discussion about what we've gone through so far and some brilliant answers and sort of probing ones to get through. But one of the questions I will ask now is programs of this breadth and depth will require quite a lot of additional headcount, in my experience, and the resources to be objective and direct in its success will be critical. So is there a recruitment phase and a departure phase that's planned in for this to be completed? So at the start of it, do you know how many people you're going to need immediately to start well, be constructive, gain pace and urgency with it? And then what is your target number of people you think you'll get the core number of operational people down to? And I think as you got Councillor Harvey in the room, she might be able to help us and say, have we got the right budget in this for this period, which I expect her to say yes. And then how much do you think it's going to cost us for the subsequent years?
So, shall I start and then let Councillor Harvey? Is that all right with Councillor Harvey if I start and then invite you to comment?
Oh yes.
So Councillor Andrews, if you refer back to the paper that we put to Cabinet back in March, we did have a set of numbers there that said this is how many additional posts and capacity we will need throughout 21, 22 and then into 23, and then that would reduce over time. So some of those posts are going to be built into our base and will be here. So for example, our quality assurance team, we know that we will need and should have a quality assurance team going forward to help us give the assurance that we need and make sure that we're continually improving long after the judges to be good in the future. But there are other posts that are about additional capacity right now and kind of doing some of the heavy lifting that you wouldn't expect to be there in 12 months' time and the like. I think the Ofsted report and this inspection mean that we will need to recalibrate that and look at that at the moment. So the feedback that we've had from our regional Ofsted inspectors has been that stick to your plan. You've got a plan, but it obviously needs to be, the pace of improvement needs to be sped up, and the outcomes for children and people need to improve faster than they are doing. But we will need to look at and review that numbers, the capacity and the budget in light of the 9 areas for improvement offered. And so we'll have to reset our priorities for the next 12 to 18 months. I'm getting a lot of support from Cabinet and from the corporate leadership team, but we will need to come back, and we will be coming back to Cabinet, I think later in November, with an update on, if you remember, the investment that was agreed earlier this year. So the tranche 2, the second half budget, we'll have to make sure that reflects our current thinking. But we've absolutely got, I'm confident I'm getting a lot of support from Cabinet and Councillor Harvey and from corporate leadership team and Paul, but whether Councillor Harvey or Paul want to add.
Well, I'll say just a little bit. You ask about the budget, Councillor Andrews, and we have provided what has been asked for, what we're asking for is that we get assurance along the way that is being spent wisely and well, and that it is actually delivering the improvements that are intended for the service. You as a committee have heard through the course of this meeting that officers say quite clearly that the difference here with this Ofsted inspection is that it's cracked the whole system wide open. For the first time, effectively, nobody can kid themselves that the Herefordshire way is the right way. Where there's been pushback or inertia on the feedback that has historically been received about practice locally, where it's fallen short. There's no oddsing this inspection. we can shine a light into, you know, every corner. There's nothing that is off the table here in terms of being looked at. And you've heard that, you know, the evidence brought out is that we were starting from a much lower base than anybody had anticipated. And one of the changes here that is needed, that Darryl and his team and Paul and the whole management team are having to amend the 3-year improvement plan on, is that we were starting to build on ground that wasn't solid. And so we've got to go another layer down. We've got to dig another layer down until we've got firm foundations that we can build off of. And that's where some of the, you know, the bulge of additional resource that you've referenced in your question, Councillor Andrews, is needed. It's not for a long time, some of it, and that's why we've got interims and why we've got, you know, agency people coming in places where we won't need them long term. But, you know, the quality team and other things we will need for that long term, you know, improvement journey. So we need to find solid ground. We need to shape those foundations, and then we can build up from there, you know, with confidence. And so, you know, we've been provided with an ask in terms of the budget. It was a big ask this year, a smaller ask next year. But as a council, we are facing, like every other council in the country, massive financial pressures because of inflation, because of the economy, because of pay rises above the level that national pay rises, not local ones, that are being negotiated, that we have to comply with, and we're happy to. Our staff have, you know, trod water on their salaries, you know, for too long. But all of that is contributing to huge cost pressures that we will have to manage through the budgeting process. And we will welcome at the right time in the process this committee's involvement in looking at what we're facing in terms of both delivering the needed resources for this improvement change programme, and also recognising, you know, as a wider council, what we're facing in terms of broader service challenges. But we've delivered what's been asked for now. We've set aside what's been asked for already for next year. And as a council, we are working through the emerging and evolving cost pressures that the national financial economy and government choices are presenting us with.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I hope that answers your question. Councillor Andrews, all right?
Yes, thank you. Very good, thank you.
I think the last comment, Chief Executive, you wanted to make a last comment on the debate.
Have you finished all the questions now?
Yeah, I'm going to summarise if you'd like to make a last comment, please.
And I think that today's been a good and helpful session for all of us, and I hope you've had the opportunity to ask all the questions you wanted to ask and some, which is good, and that, you know, we have stood up to the test in terms of being able to answer those openly, directly. Let you be the judge of that, and perhaps you'll tell us quite later some feedback. But I think for me, as I said, this is, as I've said before, you know, this is about a whole council response, and that includes scrutiny. And how do we use that valuable resource that scrutiny is, and how do we use that well as the council to deliver the improvements that we're looking for children and young people across Herefordshire? And I think what my challenge back to scrutiny would be, how do we best use the scrutiny work programme to have the greatest impact in supporting and challenging the delivery of those improvements for children and young people across Herefordshire? And I think it's, you know, for me, for what it's worth, my advice would be, like, is it time to you to take a step back in terms of what that work programme is and what the priorities are for scrutiny going forward, in light of what you've learned over the last 12 to 15 months, in light of what the Ofsted inspection has told us, and perhaps in light of some advice from Eleanor as the Commissioner, as to how we bring together her work, the work of the Improvement Board, the work of the team, and the work of Scrutiny, and how does all that come together? And I think strategically thinking about how we make the best of the resources that we have, so we can see how each bit of the organisation is playing its part. And that's something for my challenge back to Scrutiny. How do we make that best fit? And you fulfil your responsibilities as part of that.
Thank you, Paul. And we're well aware of that. We're aware of all the scrutiny committees. This one particularly has to be responsive to the need, and our work programme pretty well changes every meeting in order to respond directly to the key challenges at that moment. And that has posed real challenges on members and staff. But the officers have been great in helping us to change almost meeting to meeting what we should be covering. That reflects the actual need now. And that has been a challenge, but hopefully we're facing it. But quite agree with you, that is something we need to be able to do. And we'll recognise that challenge and hopefully facing up to it. We've got a good team, and that team is hopefully going to make it work in the way.
But I'm not sure we keep changing.
No,
it gives the sustained focus.
We have to have a balance in that, can't we? Yeah.
There's got to be room for reaction and dealing with live issues, but there's equally got to be a focus around sustainability.
Getting that balance is roughly right. Yeah, thank you. So I just picked out a few key areas that I thought came out that we should really note. First of all, risk assessment. We should be scrutinising the Children's Services risk assessment, corporate assessment. That's the first key point that came out.
So just tracking the risk register.
The risk register, sorry, yeah, the risk register, yeah. We should be scrutinising that, one key point. The second one was that we should address legal concerns, address the concerns direct to the head of legal on the issues we had on the legal questions. The third point I had was that we all talked about the need for pace and making sure that whatever happens, that we scrutinise particularly that pace is happening in proportion to what is practical and achievable. We noted that the Commissioner's key role is to assess whether they have the capacity to deliver the plan, not actually if we've made the improvements per se already or not, which I think is a really important point for us to note. We said that, and we made commitments to further listening. So we said a stronger voice for children and young people should be heard, and there were commitments to how we go about doing that. We were very good, and similarly, setting up some sort of forum for families as a whole to be involved as well and listen to families, not just young children or people, but families too. There was a key commitment therefore to some sort of development profile of the staff in order to make sure they were properly addressing and listening themselves to the needs of the families and young people. There's a key commitment to that. And I think those are the half a dozen key points I picked out as the major issues that we felt we should be making sure we reflected through to scrutiny. Does everybody agree that makes sense? Tony?
Yeah, can I just say that a key thing that came out as well is the role of the partnerships is that the council cannot deliver this on their own at pace. It's incapable, and that actually that engagement with the external partners in Herefordshire is absolutely crucial. Not just waiting, you know, for the future, because they are on the ground now, and that they can actually help us immediately.
Add to Steve to the points made. Did you want to add something else?
Yeah, there was actually. Just simply about capacity, because I think the capacity of this committee would be really invigorated by taking up the invite that we had to go and meet with social workers, to walk the floor in the MASH, and also for us to take up the invite from the LGA, which was to at least collectively watch some scrutiny sessions from Telford and Wrekin, who were the partners that we were advised to sort of follow. That did come up in another councillor here, had it in a list of questions, that hasn't happened today. And a third thing, sorry, that we record our training stroke briefing sessions in order that they're available for other members who are all saying, well, we don't know what's going on and we're not invited. So I would like that to be clear, because we're on a steep learning curve here. And the one thing that's really going to enthuse us about our jobs is talking with social workers and observing good practice and their enthusiasm. So I think that would really help. That will increase our capacity.
Great, thank you. Do hope you captured all those, Steve. Okay. I'd like to propose a motion then that Inspection of Children's Services, that the Ofsted inspection report be noted and that the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee work plan be reviewed at the next meeting to ensure that the work of the committee is focused on the main areas for improvement in children's services, as evidenced by the Ofsted report and the Council's renewed Children's Services Improvement Plan. Would someone like to propose that? That is, thank you. An outcome of this meeting, a seconder. Thank you, Tony. All those in favour? That's the voting members of the committee. Councillor Andrews, you in favour of that?
You can't vote.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, we can't vote. Sorry. No. So that was unanimous for all the voting members, I think. Yes. Thank you. It's got one of the items, two items. One is progress report. Can I just say that we should note the progress report that was submitted? We've all seen it. It's noted. Everybody agree with that? I know you've got a point to make.
Yeah, can I just go back to the point that Councillor Fagan was making? Obviously, I think a committee asked us earlier on how can they be helpful as well, and I think actually, much as I always love my time with you, it would also be helpful sometimes to see some of our partner agencies and other agencies asked to report to the Children's Scrutiny Committee, more so than they've done perhaps in the past year, because some of the key elements of this Ofsted report are about the partnership, and there's some questions that some of our partner agencies might like to sit next to me with.
We're very conscious that we haven't involved partners as much as we should either, so that's a really good point to make.
Review that can be picked up in the review program.
Okay. That can be picked up in the review work program, as Michael was saying to us. Okay. Right. I think I end the meeting basically. I'd just like to say thank you very much to the cabinet members, to the officers, chief executive, and members of this committee for your commitment to this afternoon. It's been a major commitment.